The moment Clara Whitmore stepped off that train, the entire town decided she wasn't worth keeping. They laughed at her worn dress, her calloused hands, her refusal to apologize for taking up space. What they didn't know was that this woman, mocked, dismissed, written off, would soon face down the most powerful man in the county with nothing but a stack of papers and steel in her spine. Before this story ends, you'll watch a mail-order bride destroy a land baron's empire, expose a preacher's lies, and prove that the people everyone underestimates are often the most dangerous. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far Clara's story travels. The late afternoon sun beat down on Red Hollow, Wyoming, with the kind of relentless heat that made even breathing feel like work. July 1883 had been particularly vicious. Cattle stood motionless in whatever shade they could find, crops withered despite careful watering, and the townspeople moved through their days with the tired irritation of people who knew summer wasn't finished punishing them yet. The train station sat at the edge of town, a weathered wooden structure that had seen better decades. Its paint had long since surrendered to the elements, leaving behind sun-bleached boards and a roof that leaked in 3 places when it rained. Not that rain had been much of a problem lately. When the 347 from Cheyenne finally rattled into the station, belching black smoke and squealing against its brakes, most of the platform crowd wasn't there for arrivals. They were there for entertainment. Word had spread fast through Red Hollow's tight social circles. Elias Boone, that quiet rancher who kept to himself and rarely came to town, had sent away for a bride. The kind of bride a man ordered through correspondence when local women wouldn't have him. The whispers had started weeks ago, speculation building with each passing day until it became the town's favorite topic of conversation. Now the moment had arrived, and nobody wanted to miss it. Eleanor Graves stood near the platform's edge, her silk parasol shading her from the sun, while her eyes tracked every movement with predatory interest. At 42, she commanded Red Hollow's social hierarchy with the iron certainty of someone who had never questioned her right to judge others. Her dress probably cost more than most families earned in 6 months, and she wore that fact like armor. "I heard she's from Kansas," Eleanor said to the cluster of women surrounding her. "Some failed farm situation. Absolutely desperate." "How desperate does a woman have to be?" Martha Collins whispered, though not quietly enough. "To answer an advertisement from a man she's never even met?" "Desperate enough that no man in her own town would marry her, obviously." This came from Sarah Bennett, whose sharp features somehow matched her sharper tongue perfectly. What kind of woman ends up in that situation? The kind who survives, Clara would have told them if she'd heard. But she hadn't stepped off the train yet. The passenger car doors opened with a metallic groan. A businessman emerged first, then a young couple with a fussy infant, then 2 ranch hands returning from Cheyenne. The crowd watched each person with barely concealed disappointment. Then Clara Whitmore appeared in the doorway. She was tall, taller than most of the men on the platform, with broad shoulders that spoke of years spent doing work that wasn't supposed to be women's work. Her dress was brown, faded from too many washings, with careful repairs visible at the seams where she'd extended its life past what the fabric wanted to give. Her boots had cracks in the leather that no amount of polish could hide. She carried a single worn carpet bag that looked like it had traveled more miles than most people in Red Hollow would see in their lifetimes. But it was her face that really unsettled them. She wasn't pretty in the way frontier towns expected their women to be pretty. Her features were too strong, her jaw too defined, her gaze too direct. She looked at the world like someone who had stopped asking for permission to exist in it. The laughter started almost immediately. "Good God," someone muttered. "That's her?" Sarah Bennett's voice carried across the platform. "That's what he sent for?" Eleanor Graves didn't laugh. She was too refined for open mockery, but the small smile playing at her lips was somehow worse. "Well," she said, loud enough to be heard by everyone nearby, "I suppose Elias Boone gets exactly what he deserves." Clara heard every word. Her expression didn't change. She stepped down from the train with the careful balance of someone used to unsteady ground, her eyes scanning the platform until they found what they were looking for. Elias Boone stood near the back of the crowd, holding his hat in his hands. He was 41 years old, weathered by wind and work in the way ranchers always were, with eyes that had seen enough hardship to recognize it in others. His clothes were clean but worn, practical rather than fashionable. He wasn't particularly tall or particularly handsome, but he carried himself with a quiet steadiness that made people trust him even when they didn't particularly like him. When Clara's eyes met his, something passed between them. Not romance, nothing that simple, more like recognition, the way survivors identify each other in a room full of people who've never really struggled. Elias moved through the crowd, ignoring the stares and whispers. When he reached Clara, he extended his hand. "Miss Whitmore, I'm Elias Boone. Thank you for coming all this way." Clara shook his hand firmly. Her grip was stronger than he expected. "Mr. Boone, the journey was long but manageable. Your letters didn't mention you were tall. Your letters didn't mention the town would provide a welcoming committee." She glanced at the watching crowd without embarrassment. "Though I suppose welcoming isn't quite the right word." Elias almost smiled. "No, I suppose it isn't. Should I be concerned?" "About them? No." He picked up her carpet bag without asking. "About the ranch? Maybe. It's rough out there. Rougher than I probably made it sound in my letters. Mr. Boone, I spent 7 years running a failing farm in eastern Kansas while my mother died slowly from consumption. I buried her myself because I couldn't afford help. Rough doesn't scare me much anymore." Elias looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Not disappointment, something closer to relief. "The wagon's this way." They walked together through the parted crowd, neither of them acknowledging the stares. Behind them, the whispers started immediately. "She's enormous. Did you see those hands? Imagine showing up looking like that. Poor Elias." Eleanor Graves watched them go with calculating eyes. She had built her position in Red Hollow through careful attention to social order, and something about Clara Whitmore threatened that order in ways Eleanor couldn't quite articulate yet. The woman was too tall, too strong, too unbothered by what people thought of her. That kind of woman could be dangerous if not properly managed. "Martha," Eleanor said quietly, "I believe we should pay a visit to the Boone Ranch next week to welcome the new bride properly." Martha Collins understood the tone. "Of course, Eleanor. How thoughtful of you." The wagon ride out to the ranch took nearly an hour. The road, if it could be called that, was little more than wagon ruts cutting through scrub grass and sage. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, beautiful in its harshness, unforgiving in its honesty about what survival required. For the first 20 minutes, neither of them spoke. Elias drove the wagon with practiced ease, and Clara sat beside him, studying the land with the focused attention of someone assessing a problem that needed solving. "You're quiet," Elias finally said. "I'm thinking. About? Whether I made a terrible mistake coming here." He didn't flinch at her honesty. "Have you decided?" "Not yet. The town certainly thinks I did. The town thinks a lot of things. Most of them wrong." He paused. "I should probably apologize for that reception. I didn't think they'd all show up to stare." "You don't need to apologize for other people's rudeness, Mr. Boone. They'll either learn manners or they won't. Either way, it's not your responsibility. You can call me Elias. If we're going to be married, Mr. Boone seems excessive." Clara glanced at him. "Are we going to be married? You haven't seen me in daylight until today. For all you know, I'm nothing like my letters. Are you?" "I'm exactly like my letters. I don't know how to be anything else." She turned back to the landscape. "But that doesn't mean you want to marry someone like that. A lot of men say they want honest until they actually get it." Elias was quiet for a moment, the wagon wheels creaking beneath them. "The last woman I corresponded with seemed perfect on paper. Refined, educated, proper. When she arrived last year, she took one look at the ranch and got back on the train the next morning. Didn't even stay the night. What was wrong with the ranch?" "Nothing was wrong with it. It just wasn't what she expected. Too isolated, too much work. Too different from whatever story she'd built in her head. So you're worried I'll do the same?" "Are you going to?" Clara was quiet for several long moments, studying the endless expanse of Wyoming territory. "Elias, can I call you Elias?" "Please." "Elias, I spent the last 7 years watching everything I built fall apart piece by piece. The farm, my mother's health, my reputation in town. By the time she died, I had $11, no land, and every decent person in Millbrook, Kansas convinced I was either a fool or something worse. Coming here wasn't about romance or some fantasy about frontier life. It was about finding a place where maybe I could start over without everyone already decided about who I was. She turned to look at him directly. So no, I'm not getting back on that train. Whatever your ranch looks like, I guarantee I've seen worse. And whatever work needs doing, I guarantee I know how to do it. The question isn't whether I'm staying. The question is whether you still want me to after seeing what you actually paid for. Elias met her gaze steadily. You're not what I expected, Miss Whitmore. Something in Claire's chest tightened. Here it comes, she thought. The polite disappointment. The careful explanation about how this isn't going to work out after all. You're more than I expected, Elias continued. Those women back there, laughing at you, they wouldn't last a week out here doing real work. But you? He shook his head slightly. You look at this land like you're already figuring out how to fix what's broken with it. That's not something I expected. It's something I needed. Clara found herself without words for the first time since stepping off the train. The ranch appeared gradually over a low rise, a collection of rough wooden buildings clustered around a main house that looked like it had been built in stages by someone who ran out of money halfway through. The barn leaned slightly to the left. Fencing needed repair in a dozen visible places. The garden plot near the house had gone mostly to weeds, and the whole operation had the tired air of something that was barely holding together through sheer stubbornness. Clara saw all of this in the first 30 seconds. She also saw the potential buried underneath the exhaustion. When did you build this? She asked. Bought the land 6 years ago. Built the house and barn the first 2 years. Been trying to keep it running since. He helped her down from the wagon. It's not much. No, Clara agreed, still studying the layout. But it could be. Could be what? More than it is. Your fencing is wrong for this wind. You need posts set deeper and braced differently. That garden is positioned wrong too. Not enough morning sun. And your water collection system is going to fail completely in the next hard winter. Elias stared at her. You got all that from looking at it for 2 minutes? 3 minutes. And yes, she picked up her carpet bag. Where should I put my things? He led her into the house. The interior was cleaner than she expected, but stark. The home of a man who had lived alone too long and stopped bothering with anything beyond basic function. A table, 3 chairs, a stove that had seen better days, shelves that held supplies in rough organization. The bedroom was separate, small but adequate, with a bed that looked handmade and a window that needed proper curtains. I can sleep in the barn, Elias said quietly, until we figure out what this is going to be. Clara set down her bag and turned to face him. Elias, I need to ask you something directly. All right. Did you send for me because you wanted a wife, or because you wanted free labor that you didn't have to pay? The question hung in the air between them, sharp and uncomfortable. Elias took his time answering, which Clara respected. A quick answer would have been a lie. Honestly, both. He met her eyes without flinching. This ranch needs 2 people to run it properly. I can't afford to hire help, and I don't have family left to ask. And I'm tired of being alone out here. So when I wrote those letters, I was looking for someone who could be a partner in both senses. Someone strong enough to do the work, but also someone I could talk to at the end of the day without having to pretend the work isn't hard. That's more honest than I expected. You said you value honesty. I do. But most men don't actually mean it when they say they want an honest woman. They mean they want a quiet woman who agrees with them. I've had plenty of quiet. It doesn't keep you warm at night, and it doesn't fix broken fences. He paused. What about you? Why did you really answer my advertisement? Because I was out of options and out of time. Because staying in Kansas meant watching people who used to respect me cross the street to avoid me. Because starting over somewhere where nobody knows your history seemed better than drowning in a place where everyone had already decided your story was over. What happened? To your reputation, I mean. Clara's jaw tightened slightly. That's a longer conversation, and I'm not sure you'll want to marry me after you hear it. Let's make a deal, Elias said. You tell me whatever you need to tell me when you're ready. Until then, we work together, see if this partnership makes sense. If it doesn't, I'll make sure you have enough money for a ticket to wherever you want to go next. No judgment, no questions. That's fair. Good. He headed toward the door, then paused. Clara? Yes? Those women in town? Eleanor Graves and her crowd? They're going to come after you, probably soon. Eleanor doesn't like anyone she can't control or categorize, and you don't fit into any box she understands. I've dealt with Eleanor Graves types before. They're all the same, mean in expensive dresses. She's worse than you think. She destroyed the last school teacher who tried to stand up to her. Got her run out of town completely. Clara set her carpet bag on the bed and started unpacking with methodical efficiency. Elias, I've been mocked by better people than Eleanor Graves. I've been pitied, dismissed, and blamed for things that weren't my fault by entire towns full of people who thought they knew me. One rich woman with a parasol and opinions doesn't scare me much. I'm just warning you. I appreciate the warning, but here's something you should know about me. She turned to face him. I didn't come all this way to shrink myself down into whatever shape makes other people comfortable. If Eleanor Graves has a problem with that, she's welcome to try doing something about it. She'll lose. Elias found himself believing her. The first week passed in hard work and careful navigation around each other. Clara threw herself into ranch work with an intensity that surprised even Elias. She repaired fencing, reorganized the storage shed, replanted the garden with brutal efficiency, and identified a dozen small problems that would have become major problems if left alone much longer. She also cooked, though she made it clear she wasn't interested in being decorative about it. The meals were substantial, practical, and designed to fuel work rather than impress anyone. This is good, Elias said one evening over beef stew and cornbread. It's edible. There's a difference. Most of what I've been eating for 6 years was barely edible. This is actually good. Clara almost smiled. Almost. On the fourth day, 2 ranch hands showed up looking for work. Tom Brennan was in his 50s, lean and weathered, with hands that had known rope and cattle their entire life. Danny Pierce was maybe 20, eager and clumsy in the way young men often were, but willing to learn. They stopped short when they saw Clara working on the fence line. "Ma'am," Tom said carefully, "we're looking for Elias Boone. We heard he might have work." "He's checking the north pasture, should be back within the hour. You can wait if you want." Tom glanced at Danny, then back at Clara. "Are you the new Mrs. Boone?" "Not yet. Still Clara Whitmore for now. You have a problem with that?" "No, ma'am, Tom struggled for words. "We don't mean any disrespect." "Then don't give any. You know how to work cattle?" "Been working cattle since before you were born, ma'am." "Good. Then when Elias gets back, he'll probably hire you. In the meantime, that fence post behind you is set crooked. If you want to make a good impression, you might fix it before he sees." Tom looked at the fence post, then back at Clara with new respect. "Yes, ma'am." When Elias returned, he found Tom and Danny working on the fence while Clara supervised with the critical eye of someone who knew exactly how the work should be done. "They're good workers," she told him quietly. "Tom knows his business and Danny will learn. You should hire them." "You've known them for an hour." "I've known their type my whole life. They'll work hard if you treat them fair, and they won't cause trouble." She paused. "Also, Tom's left shoulder is starting to give out. He compensates well, but you should watch for it. Don't put him on anything that requires heavy overhead work." "How do you even—" "My father had the same problem. You learn to spot it." Elias hired them both. And within 3 days, even Tom Brennan, who had strong opinions about women and their proper place, found himself taking direction from Clara without even noticing he'd started doing it. The town took notice. When Elias went in for supplies the following week, the questions started immediately. "How's the new bride working out?" asked Harold Simmons, who ran the general store. "She's not my bride yet. We're still figuring things out." "Figuring things out?" Harold's eyebrows rose. "Elias, she's been there over a week. What exactly are you figuring?" "Whether we suit each other." "And do you?" Elias considered the question while Harold's wife, Patricia, pretended not to listen from behind the fabric counter. "She's the hardest worker I've ever met," Elias said finally. "Smarter than anyone in this town gives her credit for. And she doesn't pretend to be something she's not." "But is she?" Harold made a vague gesture that was supposed to communicate something about femininity or propriety or whatever else he thought was lacking. "She's exactly what she is," Elias said flatly, "and that's more than most people manage." The conversation ended there, but Harold's expression said clearly what his mouth didn't. Elias Boone had gotten exactly what someone like him deserved, a wife nobody else would want. That evening, Eleanor Graves made good on her promise to visit. She arrived in a carriage with Martha Collins and Sarah Bennett, all three women dressed as if they were attending a social event in Denver rather than visiting a struggling ranch. Eleanor carried a basket of baked goods that probably cost more to prepare than most families' weekly food budget. Clara met them at the door, wiping flour from her hands. She'd been making bread, 4 loaves at once, because that's what the week required. "Mrs. Boone," Eleanor said warmly, though her eyes were ice. "Or should I still call you Miss Whitmore?" "Clara works fine." "How informal." Eleanor's smile never wavered. "We wanted to welcome you properly to Red Hollow. May we come in?" Clara stood in the doorway for a long moment, studying the three women with the same assessing gaze she'd used on the ranch buildings. She saw exactly what they were and exactly what they wanted. "The house isn't in any condition for entertaining," Clara said finally. "Oh, we're not here to judge," Eleanor said, though that was precisely why she was there. "We're here as neighbors, to help you settle in and understand how things work here." "How things work?" "Well, yes, Red Hollow has certain expectations, standards. We maintain a particular quality of community here, and it's important that new arrivals understand what's expected of them." Clara leaned against the doorframe. "Let me save us all some time, Mrs. Graves. You're here because I don't fit your standards, and you want to make sure I understand my place. You want me to be smaller, quieter, and more grateful than I actually am. You want me to apologize for taking up space and looking like someone who works for a living. And you're hoping that if you three show up together, I'll be intimidated enough to play whatever role you've decided I should play." The silence that followed was magnificent. Martha Collins actually gasped. Sarah Bennett's mouth fell open. Eleanor Graves's expression didn't change, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. "I have never," Eleanor said softly, "been spoken to so rudely in my entire life." "Then you've lived a charmed life, Mrs. Graves. I've been spoken to rudely more times than I can count, which is probably why I recognize the polite version of it when it shows up on my doorstep pretending to be neighborly." "How dare—" "Thank you for the basket. I'm sure the thought behind it was very sincere. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have 4 loaves of bread in the oven that need watching." Clara closed the door firmly, leaving the three women standing on the porch in stunned silence. Inside, her hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally saying what needed to be said. She'd spent too many years being polite to people who were cruel, accommodating to people who were cruel, shrinking herself to fit spaces that were never meant for her anyway. She was done with that. When Elias came in 20 minutes later, Clara was pulling bread from the oven. "I passed Eleanor Graves and her crowd on the road," he said carefully. "They looked upset. They probably are." "What happened?" "I was honest with them. You said you valued honesty." "I do, but Eleanor Graves is dangerous when she's angry." Clara set the hot bread on the cooling rack and turned to face him. "Elias, I need to tell you something about the life I left behind in Kansas." "All right." "I told you my reputation was damaged, that people crossed the street to avoid me." "I remember. What I didn't tell you was why." She took a breath. "There was a man named Walter Grayson. He owned most of the debt in 3 counties, including my family's farm. When my mother got sick and I couldn't make payments, he offered me a deal." Elias's expression hardened. "What kind of deal?" "The kind of deal powerful men offer desperate women. I turned him down. He didn't take it well." "What did he do?" "He called in the debt immediately. Forced the sale of the farm. Then he started telling everyone in town that I'd agreed to his arrangement, then tried to back out after taking money from him. By the time I realized what he was doing, the story had spread so far that trying to deny it just made me look more guilty." "That's why you left." "That's why I had to leave. Nobody would hire me. Nobody would sell to me. Even people who'd known me my whole life started treating me like I was something shameful." Her voice was steady, but her hands gripped the edge of the table. "So when I tell you I'm not afraid of Eleanor Graves and her little social games, I mean it. I've already survived worse than anything she can do to me." Elias was quiet for a long moment. "This Walter Grayson, did he... No. I got out before it came to that, but it was close. Closer than I like to think about. Is he still in Kansas?" "He died last winter. Heart attack, from what I heard. Probably all that rage finally caught up with him." "Good. The word came out harder than Elias probably intended. Clara, I need you to understand something. That won't happen here. Not on this ranch, not in this town, not while I'm alive to prevent it. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. Because the moment any man tries something like that with you, I'll make sure everyone in 3 counties knows exactly what kind of man he is. And if that doesn't work, I'll handle it more directly. Clara looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for the lie, the qualification, the eventual disappointment. She didn't find it. Why? She asked quietly. Why do you care? You barely know me. Because you deserve better than what you've gotten. And because... He stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. Because I recognize something in you. The same thing I saw in my mother before my father finally broke her spirit completely. She was strong like you once, unafraid. Then years of being told she was wrong for being that way ground her down until there was nothing left but an apology in human form. What happened to her? She died when I was 16. Officially, it was pneumonia, but I think she just stopped wanting to fight anymore. His jaw tightened. I promised myself then that if I ever had the chance to stand beside someone like she used to be, I wouldn't let the world do to them what it did to her. So that's why I care, Clara. Because you remind me of who she could have been. Something loosened in Clara's chest. Some knot she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. Eleanor Graves is going to make this very difficult, she said. Probably. The whole town might turn against me. They might. You could still change your mind. Tell me this isn't going to work. I'd understand. Elias crossed the kitchen and extended his hand. Partners? Clara shook it. Partners. Neither of them knew that 3 miles away, Eleanor Graves was already composing a letter to Kansas, specifically to a preacher she'd heard about who seemed to know quite a bit about Clara Whitmore's scandalous past. And neither of them knew that the real battle hadn't even started yet. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later, delivered by a nervous young postal clerk who couldn't quite meet Elias's eyes when he handed it over. This one's from Kansas, the clerk said, his voice pitched higher than normal. Figured you'd want it right away. Elias took the envelope, noting the official-looking seal and the unfamiliar handwriting. Thanks, Jimmy. The clerk lingered on the porch, clearly wanting to say something else. Finally, he blurted out, Mr. Boone, whatever's in that letter, people are already talking. Mrs. Graves has been asking questions about Miss Whitmore all over town. What kind of questions? The kind that aren't really questions. More like accusations with question marks at the end. Jimmy shifted uncomfortably. I shouldn't have said anything. I just thought you should know. After he left, Elias stood on the porch holding the letter like it might explode. Clara was in the garden, her sleeves rolled up, transplanting seedlings with the methodical focus she brought to every task. She looked up when she sensed him watching, her hands still buried in the soil. What's wrong? She called. Letter from Kansas. She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. Even from 30 feet away, Elias could see the way her spine straightened, the way her jaw set. She walked toward him with the careful control of someone preparing for impact. Who's it from? Don't know yet. Hasn't been opened. They went inside together. Clara washed her hands at the basin while Elias set the letter on the kitchen table like evidence at a trial. Neither of them touched it for a long moment. You want me to read it first? Elias asked. No, we do this together. He broke the seal. The letter inside was written in elaborate script on expensive paper, the kind of presentation that was meant to communicate authority and respectability. Elias read it aloud, his voice getting quieter with each sentence. To Mr. Elias Boone, it is my Christian duty to inform you of certain facts regarding the woman calling herself Clara Whitmore, currently residing at your ranch. As a servant of moral righteousness and a longtime resident of Millbrook, Kansas, I feel compelled to share information that may save you from a grave mistake. Miss Whitmore's departure from our community was not, as she may have led you to believe, the result of unfortunate circumstances or economic hardship. Rather, she left under a cloud of scandal involving her improper relationship with a prominent businessman, Mr. Walter Grayson. Despite Mr. Grayson's generosity toward her family during their time of need, Miss Whitmore engaged in behavior unbecoming of any decent woman, then attempted to extort additional funds from Mr. Grayson by threatening to damage his reputation. When he refused her demands, she spread vicious lies about him throughout the county. Mr. Grayson, a pillar of our community, suffered greatly from these false accusations before his untimely death this past winter. I share this information not out of malice, but out of concern for your well-being and the moral character of your community. A woman capable of such deception and immorality does not deserve the respectability of marriage to an honest rancher. Yours in fellowship, Reverend Milton Shaw. The silence after Elias finished reading felt like something physical pressing down on the room. Clara hadn't moved from her position by the basin. Her wet hands dripped onto the floor, but she didn't seem to notice. Her face had gone completely blank, not with shock, but with the careful emptiness of someone who had learned long ago how to survive being gutted in public. Clara, don't, her voice came out rough. Just give me a minute. She walked to the window and stared out at the ranch, at the work they'd been building together, at the life she'd started to believe might actually be possible. Her reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, or maybe like the person everyone had always insisted she was. Is it true? Elias asked quietly. Clara's laugh was bitter. Which part? The part where Walter Grayson was generous? The part where I extorted him? Or the part where I'm some kind of immoral woman who seduced a pillar of the community? Any of it. She turned to face him, and the rage in her eyes was incandescent. You want the truth, Elias? Here it is. Walter Grayson owned my family's debt. When my mother got too sick to work and I couldn't keep up with payments, he came to the farm one night, told me he'd forgive the entire debt, $2,700, if I'd come to his house twice a week as his companion. Those were his exact words. Companion. Elias's hands clenched into fists. I told him to get off my property. He laughed, said I'd change my mind when the bank came calling. 3 weeks later, he called in the debt early, demanded full payment within 30 days. I didn't have $30, let alone $2,700. So I lost the farm, lost everything we'd built, and then he started telling everyone I'd agreed to his arrangement, but backed out after he'd already given me money. That's not what happened. Of course it's not what happened. But who were people going to believe? Walter Grayson, respected businessman and church deacon? Or me, the desperate farm girl who suddenly had no farm and no reputation? She paced the kitchen, her anger making the small space feel even smaller. I tried to tell people the truth. I went to Reverend Shaw himself, actually. You know what he told me? What? That perhaps I'd misunderstood Mr. Grayson's intentions. That making such serious accusations against a respected man without proof was itself sinful. That I should pray for forgiveness and move on with my life. Her voice dripped with acid. And now that same reverend is writing letters to Wyoming telling you I'm exactly what Walter Grayson claimed I was. Elias set the letter down carefully. Shaw's lying. Of course he's lying. But that doesn't matter, does it? The letter exists, which means someone asked him to write it, which means someone in Red Hollow went looking for dirt on me and found a preacher willing to provide it. Eleanor Graves. Probably, though I'd bet money she had help. Clara stopped pacing and leaned against the counter, suddenly exhausted. This is what I warned you about, Elias. This is what follows me. You can still walk away from this. Tell everyone I lied to you, that you had no idea, that you're sending me back to Kansas. The town would respect you for it. Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter. What matters is whether you can live with being married to someone everyone thinks is a liar, and worse. Elias stood up and crossed to where she was standing. He didn't touch her, but he was close enough that she had to look at him. 3 weeks ago, he said quietly, you told me about Walter Grayson. You told me what he did and how people treated you afterward. You didn't have to tell me. You could have kept it buried and hoped it never surfaced. But you told me anyway because you value honesty more than you value protecting yourself. A lot of good that did. It did more good than you know. Because when that letter arrived today, I already knew the truth. Shaw's lies didn't land in empty ground. They landed in ground you'd already prepared by being honest with me first. He picked up the letter and tore it in half. This is garbage, and I'm not giving it the power to change anything. Clara's eyes were wet, but she blinked the tears back furiously. The town won't see it that way. Then the town can go to hell. Elias, no, listen to me. I don't care what Reverend Shaw says. I don't care what Eleanor Graves thinks. I don't care if the entire territory decides you're scandalous. I know who you are because I've watched you work. I've seen how you treat the ranch hands, how you handle problems, how you show up every day and do what needs doing without complaint. That matters more than some preacher's letter. You say that now, but when everyone in Red Hollow is talking about me, let them talk. People who've actually met you will know better, and people who haven't met you don't matter. Clara studied his face, looking for the crack, the doubt, the inevitable moment when belief would crumble under social pressure. You really mean that? I really mean that. But Clara, I need to know, is there anything else? Anything else from Kansas that might surface? She thought for a moment. There was a man before Grayson, a farmer named Robert Mills, who wanted to marry me when I was 19. I turned him down. He told people I'd let him on. That was 10 years ago, and he moved to Colorado shortly after, so I doubt anyone remembers. There was also some trouble with a shopkeeper who accused me of stealing fabric, but that was proven false when the fabric turned up in his own back room. And she paused. And when my mother died, there were whispers that I'd let her suffer too long before getting the doctor, that maybe I'd wanted her to die so I could sell the farm. Did you want her to die? I wanted her suffering to end. There's a difference. Her voice cracked slightly. But I didn't have money for the doctor until it was too late. By the time I'd saved enough, she was already gone. Some people decided that meant I'd chosen money over her life. Elias absorbed this quietly. Anything else? Isn't that enough? I'm just trying to understand what we might be dealing with. If Eleanor Graves is digging into your past, she won't stop with one letter. Clara's expression turned grim. Then she's going to be disappointed, because everything I've told you is the worst of it. I never stole, never cheated, never did any of the things people accused me of. My only crime was being poor and female and refusing to play the victim prettily enough to earn sympathy. Then we'll deal with whatever comes. Together. The word hung in the air between them. Together. It was the first time either of them had said it like a promise rather than a possibility. Before Clara could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching fast. Through the window, they saw Tom Brennan riding hard toward the house, his face tight with urgency. Elias met him at the door. What's wrong? Trouble in town, boss. Danny went in for supplies this morning and came back saying people are talking. That letter, however it got here, there are copies. Mrs. Graves has been showing them around town all morning. Clara appeared in the doorway behind Elias. How many people has she shown? Tom's expression was sympathetic but honest. Most everyone who matters, ma'am. The mayor, the bank manager, the minister, half the town council. She's calling it a civic duty, making sure people know who they're dealing with. Of course she is. Clara's voice was flat. When's the next town meeting? Sunday after services? Why? Because that's when she'll make her move. Public humiliation works best with an audience. Elias turned to look at her. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Eleanor Graves expects me to hide, to be ashamed, to either slink out of town quietly or show up on Sunday and let her tear me apart in front of everyone. Clara's jaw set. I'm thinking I should give her what she wants. That sounds like a terrible idea. It's the only idea that works. If I hide, the rumors get worse. If I run, she wins. But if I show up and face this directly, you'll get crucified, Tom said bluntly. Ma'am, no disrespect, but Eleanor Graves is vicious when she's got someone cornered. She'll make an example of you. Let her try. Clara looked at Elias. Do you trust me? That's a complicated question right now. Fair. Let me rephrase. Do you believe me? About Grayson, about Shaw, about all of it? Yes. Then Sunday, I need you to sit beside me in that meeting and not flinch. No matter what she says, no matter how bad it gets. Can you do that? Elias understood what she was asking. Public support in the face of scandal. The kind of statement that would bind them together in the town's eyes regardless of what happened next. I can do that. But Clara, going into that meeting without a plan, who says I don't have a plan? Do you? She smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. I survived 7 years in Kansas dealing with people exactly like Eleanor Graves. I learned some things about how to fight back. You'll see on Sunday. Tom looked between them nervously. Boss, maybe you should think about this. Tom, I appreciate your concern, but Miss Whitmore's right. Running doesn't solve anything. It just delays the next attack. Elias turned back to Clara. What do you need from me between now and Sunday? Keep working, act like nothing's changed. And when Danny goes into town for supplies, make sure he mentions that I'm looking forward to Sunday's meeting, that I have some things I'd like to share with the community. That'll make Eleanor nervous? Good. Nervous people make mistakes. After Tom left, Elias and Clara stood together in the kitchen, the torn letter still lying on the table between them. You want to tell me what you're actually planning? Elias asked. Not yet. Because if this goes wrong, I want you to be able to honestly say you didn't know what I was going to do. Clara, trust me, Elias, please, just this once, trust that I know how to handle this. He wanted to argue, wanted to demand details, to plan contingencies, to somehow protect her from what was coming, but something in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't asking him to save her. She was asking him to believe she could save herself. All right, he said finally. But if things start going badly on Sunday, then you follow my lead, no matter how strange it seems. She picked up the torn pieces of Shaw's letter and fed them into the stove, watching the paper curl and blacken in the flames. Eleanor Graves thinks she knows who I am because some preacher in Kansas told her a story. On Sunday, I'm going to show her exactly who I actually am. And who's that? Someone who keeps records. The days between Tuesday and Sunday moved with agonizing slowness. Clara worked the ranch as if nothing had changed, but Elias noticed the way her jaw stayed tight, the way her hands moved just a fraction faster than necessary, the way she barely slept. On Thursday, Lucy Harper showed up at the ranch carrying fresh bread and looking nervous enough to bolt at any moment. I probably shouldn't be here, Lucy said when Clara answered the door, but I wanted you to know that not everyone believes what Eleanor's saying. Clara studied the baker's wife, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who had always been kind in the careful way of people who couldn't afford to be openly defiant. Come inside, Lucy. They sat at the kitchen table while Lucy twisted her hands in her lap, clearly struggling with something. My husband says I should stay out of it, that taking sides in this will be bad for business. And he's probably right. Eleanor Graves and her friends account for a lot of our custom. Lucy looked up, meeting Clara's eyes directly. But I keep thinking about what my life would look like if I'd had your courage when I was younger. If I'd stood up for myself instead of letting people tell me who I had to be. You don't have to stand up for me, Lucy. I understand how things work. That's just it. I do have to. Because if I don't, if none of us do, then Eleanor wins forever. And I'm tired of watching her win. Lucy pulled a small envelope from her pocket. This came to the bakery yesterday. It's addressed to you, but Eleanor intercepted it and opened it before I could stop her. She was furious about what it said, so she threw it away. I fished it out of the trash. Clara opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a brief note written in shaky handwriting. Miss Whitmore, I heard you were in Red Hollow. I worked as Walter Grayson's housekeeper for 12 years before he died. If you need someone to testify about what kind of man he really was, I will do it. I've kept quiet too long already. Mrs. Helen Pritchard, Millbrook, Kansas. Clara read the note 3 times, her heart pounding. Eleanor saw this? She asked. She did. That's why she's been even more aggressive the last 2 days. She knows someone in Kansas is willing to contradict Shaw's letter, and she's trying to destroy your reputation before any other information can surface. Why would Helen Pritchard write to me now, after all these years? Maybe because she heard Shaw was spreading lies on Grayson's behalf. Maybe because Grayson's death freed her to speak. Does it matter? Clara looked at the note again, this time seeing not just the words, but the courage it took to write them. An old woman in Kansas risking her own reputation to tell the truth for someone she barely knew. Lucy, can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you really doing this? You barely know me. You have a business to protect, a husband who's probably angry you're here. What do you get out of helping me? Lucy was quiet for a moment. When I was 17, I was engaged to a boy I loved. He was killed in a ranch accident 2 weeks before the wedding. I was devastated, but also pregnant. This was 30 years ago. The shame was enormous. I had the baby in secret, gave him up to a family in Cheyenne, and came to Red Hollow to start over. Nobody here knows except my husband, and we've spent 3 decades making sure it stays that way. Clara waited, sensing there was more. Eleanor Graves found out somehow. She's never said anything publicly, but she makes sure I know she knows. Every time I consider standing up to her, Every time I think about speaking out against something she's done, I remember that she could destroy my life with one conversation. So I stay quiet. I bake bread and smile and pretend I don't see the cruel things she does. Lucy, or die, son, eyes. But watching her go after you made me realize something. I'm 62 years old, Clara. How much longer am I going to let fear control me? What kind of life is it, living under someone's thumb for 30 years? Tears were running down Lucy's face now. So maybe I'm helping you because it's the right thing to do. Or maybe I'm helping you because I need to prove to myself that I'm not completely broken. Either way, here I am. Clara reached across the table and took Lucy's hand. What you did 30 years ago, giving up your baby, that must have been impossible. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the right choice for him. He deserved better than I could give him then. And that doesn't make you shameful, Lucy. That makes you strong. The same strength you're showing right now by being here. Lucy squeezed Clara's hand. Sunday's going to be brutal. Eleanor won't hold back. I know. You have a plan? I have something better than a plan. I have the truth. And I have records to prove it. Records? Clara stood and went to her room, returning with a worn leather satchel. Inside were dozens of documents, letters, receipts, bank statements, legal notices, all carefully preserved and organized. I kept everything from Kansas. Every debt notice Grayson sent, every letter he wrote, every financial transaction. I didn't know why I was keeping them, but something told me I might need proof someday. She spread some of the documents on the table. Here's the original debt agreement with payment schedules. Here's the notice where Grayson suddenly demanded full payment years before it was due. Here's a letter from him that's inappropriate. And here's the bank record showing I never received any money from him beyond the original loan. Lucy stared at the papers. This contradicts everything in Shaw's letter. Completely. Shaw claimed I extorted Grayson and received money improperly. These documents prove I paid back every cent I borrowed plus interest, and that Grayson called in the debt early specifically to force me off the farm. Clara, this changes everything. If you show these on Sunday, that's exactly what I plan to do. Let Eleanor make her accusations. Let Shaw's letter be read publicly, and then I'll calmly present documentation that proves every word of it is a lie. Clara's smile was grim. Eleanor thinks she's cornering me. What she doesn't realize is that she's cornering herself. Lucy left shortly after, promising to be there on Sunday. Clara watched her go, feeling the weight of what was coming settle more heavily on her shoulders. That night, she and Elias sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the Wyoming prairie. The sky was on fire with orange and red, beautiful and indifferent to human drama. Lucy Harper was here today, Clara said. I saw her leaving. What did she want? Clara told him about the letter from Helen Pritchard, about Lucy's confession, about the courage it took for both women to step forward. You're building an army, Elias observed. I'm not building anything. I'm just being honest, and people are responding to that. Eleanor won't see the difference. Eleanor sees everything as a battle for control. That's her weakness. She can't imagine that some people do things without strategic calculation. Elias was quiet for a moment. After Sunday, assuming you win, there's no assuming, I will win. After you win, then what? Eleanor Graves doesn't strike me as someone who forgives humiliation. Then she'll come after me again. And again. Until either she accepts that I'm not leaving or she destroys herself trying to destroy me. Clara turned to look at him. Is that going to be a problem? Being married to someone Eleanor Graves has declared war on? We're not married yet. No, we're not. So now's your chance, Elias. After Sunday, there's no going back. If you stand beside me during that meeting, the whole town will know you've chosen sides. Your reputation will be tied to mine. If I lose, you lose too. And if you win? If I win, you'll be married to a woman half the town thinks is scandalous and the other half thinks is dangerous. Either way, your life gets more complicated. Elias looked out in the darkening prairie. You know what I was before you came here? Lonely, tired. Running a ranch that was slowly failing because I didn't have the energy or the help to keep it going. Every day felt like the same struggle, and every night felt like the same empty house. That's not an answer. It is, though, because in 3 weeks, you've made this place feel alive again. The ranch is running better, the work gets done, and when I come inside at night, there's someone here who actually talks to me about real things. You think I'm going to give that up because Eleanor Graves doesn't approve? He shook his head. Clara, I don't care if the whole town thinks you're scandalous. I care that you're honest, hardworking, and brave enough to face down the worst they can throw at you. That's worth more than 100 Eleanor Graves approvals. Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not the sudden warmth of romantic love, but something steadier and deeper. The kind of partnership that could survive winters. All right then, she said quietly. Sunday it is. Sunday morning arrived cold and clear. Clara dressed in her best dress, which still wasn't particularly impressive, and pinned her hair back with the same careful precision she used for everything else. She looked at herself in the small mirror and saw what she always saw. A woman too tall, too strong, too uncompromising to fit comfortably into the world's expectations. Good, she said to her reflection. Let them see exactly what they're dealing with. Elias was waiting by the wagon, wearing his cleanest shirt, and the expression of a man heading into battle. Tom and Danny had both asked to come along, which surprised Clara until Tom explained. Ma'am, if you're making a stand, you ought to have people standing with you, even if we're just ranch hands. You're not just anything, Tom, but thank you. The ride into town was quiet. Nobody spoke much, but Clara could feel the tension building. By the time they reached Red Hollow, her hands were steady and her mind was clear. She'd spent the morning going over her documents one more time, making sure everything was in order. The community hall was packed. Every bench filled, people standing along the walls, enough tension in the air to choke on. Eleanor Graves sat in the front row, perfectly composed, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Elias's entire wagon. When Clara entered, the whispers started immediately. But Clara didn't shrink. She walked straight down the center aisle with Elias beside her and took a seat in the third row where everyone could see her clearly. Tom and Danny sat behind them, a silent wall of support. The meeting opened with standard business: water rights discussion, a proposal for a new school building, complaints about cattle wandering onto other people's property. Clara sat perfectly still through all of it, waiting. Then Mayor Walsh cleared his throat uncomfortably. There's one more matter that's been brought to my attention. A matter of community character that Mrs. Graves has asked to address. Eleanor stood gracefully, turning to face the crowd with the practiced ease of someone used to public speaking. Thank you, Mayor Walsh. I know this is difficult, but as leading citizens of Red Hollow, we have a responsibility to maintain certain standards. Her eyes found Clara in the crowd. Recently, our community welcomed a new member, Miss Clara Whitmore, who arrived as a mail-order bride for Mr. Elias Boone. Normally, such arrangements are private matters. However, when information comes to light that affects the moral character of our town, silence becomes complicity. She pulled out a letter, Shaw's letter, and began reading it aloud. The room was absolutely silent, except for Eleanor's voice, clear and damning, laying out every accusation against Clara as if they were proven facts rather than vicious lies. When she finished, she looked directly at Clara. Miss Whitmore, do you have anything to say in your defense? Clara stood slowly. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady as she picked up the satchel she'd brought with her. Yes, Mrs. Graves, I have quite a bit to say. Every eye in the community hall fixed on Clara as she stood. The silence was so complete that the sound of her opening the leather satchel seemed unnaturally loud. She didn't rush, didn't fumble. Just methodically began removing documents and setting them on the bench beside her. Eleanor's smile faltered slightly. Miss Whitmore, I don't think... You've had your turn, Mrs. Graves. Now I'll have mine. Clara's voice carried to every corner of the room, steady and clear. You read a letter from Reverend Milton Shaw of Millbrook, Kansas. A letter making specific claims about my character and my past. Before this community decides who I am based on those claims, I'd like to present some additional information. Mayor Walsh looked uncomfortable. Miss Whitmore, accusations of this nature are serious. They absolutely are, which is why I brought documentation. She held up the first paper. This is the original loan agreement between my family and Walter Grayson, dated March 1876. The terms were clear: $2,700 borrowed against our farm, to be repaid over 7 years at 6% interest. Standard terms for that time and place. She set it down and picked up another document. This is the payment ledger I maintained personally. Every payment made, every date, every receipt number. As you can see, I was never late, not once in 5 years. This proves nothing, Eleanor said, though her voice had lost some of its confidence. Reverend Shaw's letter doesn't dispute that there was a loan. Reverend Shaw's letter claims I received money improperly from Mr. Grayson, that I engaged in immoral behavior in exchange for financial benefit, that when he refused my demands for more money, I spread lies about him. Clara's eyes swept the room. These are specific accusations. They should require specific proof. Does Mrs. Graves have any documentation supporting these claims? Any bank records showing suspicious transfers? Any witnesses to this alleged arrangement? Eleanor's jaw tightened. The word of a respected reverend is just words. I have paper. Clara held up another document. This is a letter from Walter Grayson to me, dated November 1880. Would you like me to read it aloud, Mrs. Graves, or would you prefer I simply describe its contents? The room waited. Eleanor's face had gone pale. I'll describe it, Claire said. Mr. Grayson writes that he's noticed my mother's declining health has put me in a difficult position financially. He offers his deepest sympathy and suggests we meet privately to discuss alternative arrangements for managing the debt. He specifically mentions that a woman of my particular qualities should not have to struggle alone. She looked up. Those were his exact words, particular qualities, alternative arrangements. Someone in the back of the room coughed. The sound seemed to break whatever spell had been holding everyone frozen. That could mean anything, Sarah Bennett said, though she sounded uncertain. Perhaps he was offering legitimate financial assistance. Then why did I decline? Clara pulled out another letter. This is my response to Mr. Grayson, dated 1 week later. I thank him for his sympathy, but politely state that I prefer to handle my family's debts through the existing legal agreement. I make no mention of alternative arrangements. She set down that letter and picked up yet another document. Her hands were shaking slightly now, but her voice remained steady. This is Mr. Grayson's reply, dated November 20th, 1880. In this letter, he becomes less subtle. He states that my refusal of his generous offer shows poor judgment, that women in my position cannot afford to be proud, that he could make things very difficult for me if I continue to be unreasonable. The room had gone completely still. Even Eleanor seemed uncertain now, her usual composure cracking at the edges. 2 weeks after that letter, Claire continued, Mr. Grayson exercised a clause in our loan agreement allowing him to demand full repayment with 30 days' notice. This clause was buried in the contract and hadn't been mentioned in our 5 years of regular payments. Here's the notice. She held up another paper. Full payment demanded by December 25th, 1880. $2,100 remaining on a debt that wasn't due for another 2 years. Mayor Walsh leaned forward. Why would he call it in early if you'd been making regular payments? Because I refused his alternative arrangement. Claire's voice was hard now. Because powerful men don't like being told no by desperate women. Because he could. These are serious allegations, the mayor said carefully. Walter Grayson was a respected businessman. Walter Grayson was a predator who used debt to control women. The words came from the back of the hall. Everyone turned to see a woman in her 60s standing up, her face drawn but determined. I'm Helen Pritchard. I was Mr. Grayson's housekeeper for 12 years. I saw things, heard things, things that made me sick to keep silent about. Eleanor found her voice. This is highly irregular. So is dragging someone's name through mud based on lies, Helen said sharply. She walked down the aisle, her steps slow but steady. I came all the way from Kansas because I heard Reverend Shaw was spreading the same lies about Miss Whitmore that Mr. Grayson spread when he was alive. I couldn't let it stand anymore. Mrs. Pritchard, Mayor Walsh said, you're claiming to have information about Walter Grayson's character? I'm claiming to have witnessed it firsthand. Miss Whitmore wasn't the first woman Mr. Grayson tried that particular strategy with. There were 3 others I knew of personally, all in similar situations, widows or unmarried women with debts they couldn't pay. He'd offer to help, but the help always came with conditions. Her voice was bitter. One woman accepted his terms. She lived in a house he provided for 2 years while the whole town whispered about her. When he got tired of her, he threw her out with nothing. She died the following winter. The room erupted in whispers. Eleanor stood abruptly. This is slander against a dead man who cannot defend himself. It's truth, Helen said flatly, and I have my own records to prove it. Letters he dictated to me, financial records I maintained, names of other women if anyone wants to verify my story. She turned to Clara. I'm sorry I didn't come forward sooner, Miss Whitmore. I was afraid. But when I heard Shaw was writing letters on Grayson's behalf, spreading the same lies Grayson used to destroy women's reputations, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. Clara's throat was tight. Thank you, Mrs. Pritchard. Eleanor's composure was crumbling visibly now. Even if this is true, even if Walter Grayson was not the man we believed, that doesn't explain why Miss Whitmore left Kansas under such suspicious circumstances. I left because staying would have killed me, Clara said quietly. Not physically, though I considered that too. But every day in Millbrook was another day of being treated like I'd done something shameful when my only crime was refusing to be victimized. Every store I walked into, every street I crossed, I could see people deciding who I was based on Walter Grayson's lies. And Reverend Shaw, her voice turned to ice. Reverend Shaw knew the truth. I went to him personally and told him what Grayson had done. He told me I must have misunderstood, that accusing a prominent man without proof was sinful. She turned to face the crowd directly. So, here's what I want everyone in this room to understand. I didn't come to Red Hollow running from scandal. I came here running from a place where the truth didn't matter as much as protecting powerful men's reputations. I came here hoping to find somewhere I could start over without being defined by someone else's lies. And the moment I arrived, Mrs. Graves decided I wasn't worthy of that chance. Eleanor's face flushed. I was acting in the community's interest. You were acting in your own interest. You saw a woman who didn't fit your idea of what a rancher's wife should be. Too tall, too strong, too direct, and you decided to destroy me before I could establish myself here. Clara's voice was steel now. You went looking for dirt in my past. You found a corrupt preacher willing to write lies. And you tried to use those lies to humiliate me in front of this entire town. How dare you? How dare I? How dare you? Clara took a step forward. You don't know anything about me except that I don't meet your standards for feminine propriety. You don't know what I survived. You don't know what I lost. You don't know how hard I fought just to stay alive. And you certainly don't have the right to decide whether I deserve a place in this community. The silence was absolute. Eleanor stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, clearly unused to being challenged so directly. Lucy Harper stood up from where she'd been sitting near the back. Clara's right. Eleanor, you've been running this town like your personal kingdom for years, deciding who belongs and who doesn't based on nothing but your own prejudices. I'm tired of it. We're all tired of it. Lucy. Eleanor's voice held a warning. No, I'm done being scared of you. Lucy's voice shook but held firm. You think you have power over me because you know something from my past. Well, here it is for everyone to hear. When I was 17, I had a baby out of wedlock. I gave him up for adoption and came here to start over. That's my scandal, Eleanor. That's what you've been holding over my head for 30 years, and I'm done letting you use it to keep me quiet. The room erupted again. Several people looked shocked, but others, more than Lucy probably expected, looked sympathetic. Martha Collins stood next, her face pale but determined. Eleanor, you convinced me to snub Clara when she first arrived. You made her sound dangerous, immoral, unworthy. I went along with it because I always go along with what you say. But I'm ashamed of myself now. Clara hasn't done anything except work hard and be honest. That's more than most of us can say. One by one, other women began standing. Not all of them. Eleanor still had her supporters, women who valued social standing over integrity, but enough to make a difference, enough to show Clara she wasn't alone. Eleanor looked around the room with barely concealed fury. She'd expected to lead a unanimous condemnation. Instead, her careful control was fracturing in real time. This is absurd, she said, her voice sharp. You're all being manipulated by a woman who's clearly skilled at deception. The only deception here came from your letter. The voice was male this time, and everyone turned to see Elias standing. Mrs. Graves, you orchestrated this entire attack on Clara's character without knowing anything true about her. You paid, or convinced someone to pay, a preacher in Kansas to write lies. That's not protecting the community. That's cruelty disguised as civic duty. Mr. Boone, you're obviously biased. Of course I'm biased. I've spent 3 weeks working beside Clara. I've seen how she handles problems, how she treats people, how she shows up every day and does what needs doing without complaint. That's how I know who she is. You've spent 3 weeks spreading rumors based on a letter you didn't bother to verify. That's how I know who you are. Mayor Walsh cleared his throat. Perhaps we should... There's more. Interruption came from a man standing near the door. June Whitaker's husband, Edward, looked nervous but resolute. Mrs. Graves, you should know that your involvement in this situation goes deeper than anyone realizes. Eleanor's face went very still. Edward, I don't know what you think you know. I know you paid Reverend Shaw $500 to write that letter. Edward pulled papers from his coat. I know, because I helped arrange the bank draft. You told me it was for church donations. These are the records showing the payment. The room exploded in gasps and angry whispers. Eleanor's face drained of all color. That's completely false. It's documented, Eleanor. Bank records don't lie. Edward looked at Clara. I'm sorry, Miss Whitmore. I didn't know what the money was for until after the letter arrived. When I realized what my wife and I had helped facilitate, I couldn't stay quiet. Clara stared at the papers Edward was holding. Actual proof that Eleanor had paid for Shaw's letter. Proof that turned this from a social attack into something closer to fraud. Mayor Walsh stood up, his face grave. Mrs. Graves, if what Edward says is true, it's not true. He's lying to protect that woman. Eleanor pointed at Clara with a shaking hand. This is exactly what I warned you about. She comes into our town, and within weeks, she's turned people against each other, destroyed reputations, created chaos. I haven't destroyed anything, Clara said quietly. You did that yourself the moment you decided my existence was a threat that needed eliminating. Eleanor looked around the room, clearly searching for support, and finding far less than she expected. Her carefully constructed authority was crumbling, and everyone could see it happening. This meeting is over, she said sharply. Mayor Walsh, I demand you end this circus immediately. Yes. On the contrary, Mrs. Graves, I think we're just getting started. The mayor's voice was harder than Clara had heard it before. If you did indeed pay for that letter, as Edward's records suggest, then you've committed fraud for the purpose of defamation. That's a serious crime. It's nothing of the sort. It absolutely is. This came from a man Clara didn't recognize, well-dressed and authoritative. I'm County Judge Harrison, and I happen to be visiting Red Hollow this week. I've been sitting in the back listening to these proceedings with growing concern. Mrs. Graves, if you paid money to procure false testimony for the purpose of destroying someone's reputation, you violated several territorial laws. Eleanor's eyes widened. She clearly hadn't expected a judge to be present. I was acting to protect the community. You were acting to destroy someone you considered a threat to your social position, Judge Harrison said. There's a significant difference. Miss Whitmore, do you wish to press charges? Clara looked at Eleanor. This woman who had tried so hard to break her, who had dug into her past searching for weapons, who had paid good money to spread lies. She could press charges, could watch Eleanor face the same public humiliation she'd intended for Clara. But something in Clara resisted the easy revenge. No, she said, finally. I don't want charges pressed. I just want the truth on record. I want everyone in this room to know that the accusations against me were lies, purchased for the specific purpose of driving me out of Red Hollow. I want Mrs. Graves to understand that her attempt failed, and I want her to know that if she comes after me again, I won't be so generous with my response. Eleanor's face was a mask of fury and humiliation. You self-righteous... Eleanor, that's enough. The sharp voice came from Eleanor's own husband, Marcus Graves, who had been sitting silently throughout the entire confrontation. He stood now, looking tired and angry. You told me you were protecting the town. You told me Clara Whitmore was dangerous. But all I've seen tonight is you destroying your own reputation trying to destroy someone who never did anything to you. Marcus, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. You couldn't control her, so you tried to eliminate her. It's the same thing you've done to half a dozen other women over the years. I've ignored it because it was easier than fighting you. But this time you went too far. The public rebuke from her own husband seemed to break something in Eleanor. She stood there shaking with rage and shame, before finally turning and walking stiffly toward the door. Several of her closest supporters followed, but noticeably fewer than would have a week ago. After she left, the room slowly began to breathe again. People started talking in low voices, processing what they'd witnessed. Judge Harrison approached Clara. "Miss Whitmore, I apologize on behalf of this community. What you experienced tonight should never happen to anyone." "Thank you, Your Honor, but honestly, I'm just glad the truth came out." "The truth came out because you had the foresight to keep records and the courage to present them publicly. Most people in your situation would have either run or fought back with equal dishonesty. You did neither. That speaks well of your character." After the judge moved away, people began approaching Clara, some to apologize, some to offer support, some just to shake her hand and acknowledge what had happened. It was overwhelming and exhausting and strangely affirming all at once. Lucy Harper hugged her tightly. "You were magnificent. I was terrified. You didn't show it. You stood there and faced down the most powerful woman in Red Hollow without flinching. I've had practice facing down powerful people who wanted to destroy me. This wasn't my first time." Helen Pritchard approached more hesitantly. "Miss Whitmore, I hope my testimony didn't make things worse. You saved me, Mrs. Pritchard. You didn't have to come all this way, didn't have to risk your own reputation, but you did it anyway. I'll never forget that." Helen's eyes were wet. "I should have spoken up years ago. For you and for the others. I was scared, and I let that fear keep me silent, while good women suffered. You're speaking now. That's what matters." As the crowd slowly dispersed, Clara found herself standing with Elias, Tom, and Danny outside the community hall. The night air was cold and clean, and Clara breathed it in deeply, feeling something loosen in her chest. "That was the most intense thing I've ever witnessed," Danny said, his eyes wide. "Ma'am, you just took down Eleanor Graves in front of the whole town." "I didn't take her down. She took herself down by lying. Either way, she's not going to forget this," Tom said seriously. "Boss, you both need to watch yourselves. A woman like Eleanor Graves doesn't accept defeat gracefully." "I know." Claire looked at Elias. "Are you all right?" "I know that was difficult." "Difficult? Clara, that was—" He shook his head, seeming to search for words. "I've never seen anyone stand up to Eleanor like that. Never seen anyone in this town have the courage to call her out publicly. You didn't just defend yourself, you changed something fundamental about how this community works." "I just told the truth." "You think that's simple? Truth is the hardest thing most people ever try to tell." He took her hand, the first time he'd done so in public, and held it firmly. "I'm proud to stand beside you, Clara Whitmore. Whatever comes next, we face it together." The ride back to the ranch was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Clara felt wrung out, exhausted from the emotional weight of the confrontation, but also strangely lighter than she'd felt in years. When they reached the ranch, Tom and Danny headed to the bunkhouse, while Elias and Clara stood together in the yard, neither quite ready to go inside yet. "Can I ask you something?" Elias said. "Of course." "Back there, when Judge Harrison offered to press charges against Eleanor, why didn't you? She tried to destroy you. She deserved whatever punishment she got." Clara thought about it for a moment. "Because punishment wasn't the point. I didn't go to that meeting to destroy Eleanor Graves. I went to clear my name and establish the truth. Once that was done, anything else would have just been revenge. And revenge—" She trailed off, looking for the right words. "Revenge would have made me just like her. Someone who uses power to hurt people when they feel threatened. You're a better person than me. I wanted to see her prosecuted." "No, you wanted to protect me. That's different." She smiled slightly. "Besides, Eleanor Graves losing her social power in Red Hollow is probably worse for her than any legal punishment would be. Her entire identity was built on being the woman everyone feared and respected. Now she's just the woman who tried to destroy someone with lies and failed publicly. That's its own kind of justice." They went inside together. The house felt different somehow, less like a temporary arrangement and more like an actual home. Clara found herself thinking about what that meant, about what happened next now that the immediate crisis had passed. "Elias?" she said. "Yeah?" "When you asked me to come here, you said you wanted a partner, someone to work the ranch with you and share your life. Is that still what you want, now that you've seen what trouble I bring with me?" He looked at her for a long moment. "Clara, you didn't bring trouble. Trouble found you because you refused to be what other people think you should be. That's not the same thing." But the question stands, is this still what you want? Instead of answering immediately, Elias walked to the shelf where he kept his personal papers and pulled out a small box. He opened it to reveal a simple gold ring, nothing fancy but solid and real. This was my mother's wedding ring, the only thing I have left of her. I've been carrying it around for 3 weeks, trying to figure out the right time to ask you properly. He held it out to her. I don't have a romantic speech prepared. I don't have promises about an easy life or guarantees that everything will work out perfectly. But I can promise you this. If you marry me, I'll stand beside you through whatever comes. I'll trust your judgment, respect your strength, and never ask you to be smaller than you are just to make other people comfortable. That's all I can offer. Clara looked at the ring, then at Elias, then back at the ring. She'd never expected romance, had stopped believing in it years ago when life taught her that survival mattered more than sentiment. But partnership, real partnership with someone who saw her clearly and chose her anyway, that was something else entirely. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit surprisingly well, as if his mother's hands had been the same size as Clara's work-roughened ones. They stood there in the kitchen, not quite embracing, but standing close enough that Clara could feel the warmth of him, the solid reality of another person choosing to share space with her without asking her to change shape to fit. We should probably get married soon, Elias said, before Eleanor Graves figures out a new way to cause trouble. She will, you know, come after us again. Probably. But next time we'll be ready. He paused. Actually, I've been thinking about that. About Eleanor and the real reason she went after you so hard. Because I didn't fit her idea of proper womanhood? Partly. But I think there's more to it. Elias moved to the window, looking out at the dark prairie. Eleanor's power in this town comes from controlling social relationships and business connections. She influences who gets bank loans, whose businesses get patronized, which families get included in important decisions. It's a web of favors and obligations that she's spent 20 years building. I still don't see what that has to do with me. You're a threat to that system because you exist outside it. You don't need her approval, don't want her patronage, don't care about her social circles. Worse, you proved tonight that her power isn't absolute, that people will stand up to her if they have the courage. That's dangerous to someone whose entire identity is built on being untouchable. Clara absorbed this. So you think she'll come after us again, but not directly this time? I think she'll look for indirect ways to hurt us. Business pressure, maybe, social isolation, anything that doesn't leave her fingerprints. Then we need to be smarter than her, more prepared. Clara's mind was already working through possibilities. We need allies, Elias. Real ones. Lucy, Helen, Edward Whittaker, anyone else who stood up tonight. We need to build our own network. That sounds like something Eleanor would do. The difference is our network would be built on honesty instead of fear. People helping each other because they want to, not because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. Elias smiled. You've thought about this. I've had 7 years to think about power and how it works, about why some people have it and others don't, about the difference between authority that's earned and authority that's taken. She looked at him directly. Eleanor Graves took her authority by making people afraid to defy her. We're going to earn ours by being the kind of people others want to stand beside. That's ambitious. That's necessary, because Eleanor's not the only threat out here. Clara pulled out the chair and sat down heavily, suddenly exhausted again. There are always men like Walter Grayson, always people who see weakness and decide to exploit it. The only way to survive is to be stronger than they expect and better prepared than they are. You sound like you're planning for war. I'm planning for reality, which sometimes looks like war whether we want it to or not. They talked late into the night, mapping out strategies and contingencies, discussing which families in Red Hollow might be potential allies and which were too tied to Eleanor's influence to trust. It wasn't romantic planning for a future together, it was tactical preparation for survival, but somehow that felt more honest than romance would have. When Clara finally went to bed, the ring felt strange on her finger, unfamiliar and significant. She lay in the darkness, thinking about the day, about Eleanor's face when the lies crumbled, about the people who had stood up when standing up meant risk. She thought about Elias standing beside her without flinching, about Lucy confessing her secret publicly rather than staying silent, about Helen Pritchard traveling from Kansas just to tell the truth. For the first time in 7 years, Clara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where truth mattered more than power, where people could be flawed and honest and still deserve dignity. It was a fragile hope, the kind that could be destroyed if she wasn't careful, but it was hope nonetheless. In her own room down the hall, Eleanor Graves sat at her writing desk, staring at blank paper and trembling with fury. The humiliation of tonight burned through her like acid. She'd been challenged before. People had disagreed with her, occasionally defied her, but never had anyone stripped away her authority so completely and so publicly. Clara Whitmore had made her look foolish, weak, dishonest. That could not stand. Eleanor picked up her pen and began writing. Not to Reverend Shaw this time. That avenue was closed. But she knew other people, had other connections. There were ways to hurt someone that didn't involve public confrontation, ways that wouldn't trace back to her. She would be more careful this time, more patient, more strategic. But Clara Whitmore would regret the day she'd set foot in Red Hollow. Eleanor would make absolutely certain of that. 2 days after the town meeting, a man named Victor Hale rode up to the Boone Ranch just after dawn. Clara was already working in the garden, and she watched him approach with the cautious attention she'd learned to give to unexpected visitors. Hale was in his late 40s, well-dressed in a way that suggested money, but not taste, with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. He dismounted smoothly and removed his hat in a gesture that was probably meant to look respectful. "Mrs. Boone, I presume, or is it still Miss Whitmore?" "Still Miss Whitmore for now. What can I do for you, Mr. Hale?" "Victor Hale. I'm a land broker operating throughout the territory. I heard about your impressive performance at the town meeting Sunday night. Quite the spectacle, from what I understand." Clara set down her gardening tools and stood, wiping dirt from her hands. Something about this man made her skin crawl, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly why yet. News travels fast. In small towns, it always does, particularly when it involves the public humiliation of someone as prominent as Eleanor Graves. His smile widened. "You made quite an enemy there, Miss Whitmore. I admire your courage, even if I question your judgment. I didn't come out here to make enemies or friends, Mr. Hale. I came to work. So unless you have business with the Boone Ranch, I'll get back to it." "Actually, I do have business. I'm looking for Mr. Boone. Is he available?" Elias emerged from the barn at that moment, leading one of the horses. He stopped when he saw Hale, and Clara noticed the way his expression closed off immediately. "Victor, what brings you out here? Can't an old acquaintance pay a friendly visit?" "We're not acquaintances, and you don't make friendly visits. What do you want?" Hale's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Always so direct, Elias. I'm here about the Morrison property. I understand you've been considering purchasing it." Clara looked at Elias questioningly. He hadn't mentioned any property purchase to her. "I've looked at it," Elias said carefully. "Haven't decided anything yet." "Well, time's running out for deciding. The bank's threatening foreclosure, and several interested parties are circling. I wanted to make sure you understood the opportunity before it slips away." Hale pulled papers from his saddlebag. "I've drawn up preliminary agreements that would give you first option to purchase at a very reasonable price." "How reasonable?" $3,500 for 80 acres, including water rights to Harper Creek. Clara's attention sharpened at the mention of water rights. Wyoming was dry country, and water access could make or break a ranch. "That's lower than market value," Elias said, and Clara heard the suspicion in his voice. "Consider it a friend helping a friend. Besides, with your recent social complications, I thought you might appreciate a gesture of goodwill, a way to strengthen your position here." There it was, the first hint of manipulation. Clara moved closer, studying Hale with open scrutiny. "Mr. Hale, why exactly are you so interested in helping Elias purchase this property?" Hale turned to her with that same empty smile. "I'm a businessman, Miss Whitmore. I facilitate transactions that benefit all parties. Elias gets land he needs, the bank recovers its loan, and I collect a modest commission. Everyone wins. Except the Morrisons, I assume. What happens to them?" "The Morrisons are already gone, moved to California 3 months ago and left the property to the bank. So really, there's no one being hurt here." Something about the whole situation felt wrong to Clara, but she couldn't put her finger on what exactly was bothering her. The price was good. Maybe too good. And Hale's eagerness to facilitate the deal seemed excessive for the modest commission he claimed to be earning. I'll think about it, Elias said. Give me a week to review the paperwork and consider my options. Hale's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. I'm afraid a week might be too long. Like I said, there are other interested parties. I'd need your commitment by Friday at the latest. Then I guess those other parties better move fast, because I don't make decisions about spending $3,500 in 3 days. Elias handed the papers back. Leave a copy if you want. I'll look it over. But I'm not promising anything. After Hale left, Clara and Elias stood in the yard watching him ride away. You don't trust him, Clara said. It wasn't a question. Victor Hale is the kind of man who makes money off other people's desperation. He's been involved in half the shady land deals in 3 counties over the past 5 years. If he's offering me a good price on that property, it's because there's something wrong with it that I haven't figured out yet. Or because he wants something else from you. Elias looked at her. What do you mean? I mean, men like Hale don't do favors without expecting something in return. The question is what he's really after. Clara picked up her gardening tools again, but her mind was racing. Tell me about this Morrison property. Why would you want it? Harper Creek runs through it. During dry years, it's one of the few reliable water sources in this area. If I owned that land, I'd have guaranteed water access even in the worst droughts. And if someone else owned it, then they'd control who else gets water. They could cut deals with neighboring ranches, charge for access, or just cut people off entirely if they wanted leverage. Clara's eyes narrowed. So whoever owns the Morrison property effectively controls water access for multiple ranches in this area. Exactly. Which is why the price Hale's offering doesn't make sense. That land is worth twice what he's asking, maybe more if you factor in the strategic value of the water rights. Unless he doesn't care about making money on the sale, because he's planning to make money some other way. Clara set down her tools again. Elias, we need to find out who actually holds the debt on that property. Not just which bank, but who at the bank. And we need to know who else Hale's been talking to about it. You think he's setting up some kind of scheme? I think a man who shows up 2 days after Eleanor Graves gets publicly humiliated, offering you an implausibly good deal that would require immediate payment, is either the luckiest businessman in Wyoming or he's working an angle we haven't spotted yet, and I don't believe in luck that convenient. Over the next 2 days, Clara and Elias quietly investigated the Morrison property situation. Tom Brennan had a cousin who worked at the Red Hollow Bank, and through him they learned that Victor Hale had recently purchased the Morrison debt from the bank at a significant discount, which meant Hale effectively owned the property already and was trying to sell it to Elias at an inflated price while pretending it was a bargain. But that wasn't the most interesting part. Hale's been meeting with Eleanor Graves, Tom reported on Thursday evening. My cousin saw them at the bank together twice this week. They were in the manager's office for over an hour the first time. Clara and Elias exchanged looks. Eleanor's involved in this, Clara said. Has to be. The timing's too perfect. But what's the play? Elias paced the kitchen, trying to work it out. Even if I bought the property at Hale's price, how does that benefit Eleanor? Maybe it's not about you buying it. Maybe it's about you not buying it. Clara pulled out paper and started sketching a rough map of the area ranches. Who else needs water access from Harper Creek? The Patterson Ranch to the north, the Chen family to the west, Old Widow Morrison to the south, no relation to the family that left. And the Graves estate borders it on the east. Clara studied the map. What happens if Eleanor or someone she controls buys the Morrison property? She'd have leverage over 3 neighboring ranches, could cut water deals that favor her property, restrict access during dry years, basically control the economic viability of every ranch that depends on that creek. And you said the drought this year has been bad. How bad? Bad enough that several ranches are already struggling. Another dry year or two, and some of them won't survive without reliable water access. Clara sat back, seeing the picture come together. It's not about selling you the property, it's about creating a crisis. Hale offers you a deal with an impossible timeline. You can't accept because you're smart enough to be suspicious. So he sells to Eleanor, or one of her proxies instead. Then over the next year or two, Eleanor uses the water rights to pressure the struggling ranches into selling at reduced prices or accepting unfavorable terms. She consolidates control over a significant portion of the valley, and Hale collects fees for facilitating every transaction. But Elias stared at her. That's elaborate. That's business. Eleanor lost social control after Sunday's meeting. So now she's going after economic control instead. If she can make herself indispensable to the valley's water supply, she rebuilds her power base through necessity rather than fear. So what do we do? Clara thought for a moment. We need to know exactly what Hale's timeline is and why. If he's pushing for a quick sale, there's a reason. Either he needs capital fast or there's something time-sensitive about the whole arrangement, and we need to warn the other ranchers what's coming. If we warn them and we're wrong, we'll look paranoid. And if we don't warn them and we're right, we'll watch Eleanor destroy half the valley's independent ranchers. Clara met his eyes. I'd rather be wrong and paranoid than right and silent. The next morning, Clara and Elias rode to the Patterson Ranch. James Patterson was a weathered man in his 60s who had been working the land since before Red Hollow even existed as a town. His wife Mary greeted them at the door with cautious warmth. Elias, Miss Whitmore, this is unexpected. Come in. Over coffee, Elias explained what they'd learned about the Morrison property and Hale's involvement. James listened without interrupting, his face growing grimmer as the story unfolded. That matches what I've been hearing, James said finally. Hale approached me last week about selling my northern acres, the ones that border the creek, offered what seemed like a fair price but wanted an answer within days. I told him I wasn't interested in selling. He got pushy about it, kept talking about how hard the next few years were going to be, how having liquid capital might be smarter than holding on to struggling land. Did he mention Eleanor Graves? Clara asked. Not directly, but he did say that some of the valley's more established families were making strategic moves to consolidate their holdings, that I should consider whether I wanted to be part of that consolidation or get left behind. Mary Patterson leaned forward. We've been on this land for 43 years, raised our children here, buried our daughter here when the fever took her in 71. We're not selling to anyone, least of all to Eleanor Graves, so she can build some kind of water empire. Then we need to make sure you don't have to, Clara said. James, if Hale controls the Morrison property and cuts off your water access, how long could you survive? With this drought? Maybe 6 months? Possibly a year if we reduce the herd and pray for rain. After that, he shook his head. We'd have no choice but to sell. What if there was another option? What if someone bought the Morrison property specifically to ensure fair water access for everyone who needs it? James looked skeptical. Who's going to do that? The only people with that kind of capital are the same people who'd want to use it as leverage. Not necessarily. Clara was thinking fast now, ideas forming even as she spoke. What if multiple ranchers pooled resources, bought the property collectively, and agreed to shared water rights? That's complicated. Legal agreements, trust issues. What happens when someone wants to sell their share? Complicated isn't impossible, and it's better than watching Eleanor Graves pick you off one by one. Clara looked at Elias. How much capital could we pull together if we really tried? From the ranch? Maybe $800 without crippling our operations. The Pattersons? James winced. 400, maybe 5 if we sold some equipment we could replace later. That's not enough for the property, even at Hale's inflated price. Mary sounded defeated. No, but it's a start. And there are other ranches. The Chens, the widow Morrison, possibly Lucy Harper if she could convince her husband. If we could get 5 or 6 families together, pool our resources. That requires trust, James interrupted. These are people who don't necessarily like each other, don't have any history of cooperation. You're asking them to commit their life savings to a collective venture with people they barely know. Clara smiled slightly. I convinced an entire town meeting that I wasn't the immoral woman Eleanor Graves claimed I was. I think I can convince a few ranchers that cooperation beats destruction. Over the next week, Clara threw herself into organizing with the same fierce energy she'd brought to fixing the ranch. She rode from property to property, talking to ranchers, listening to their concerns, mapping out who needed what and who had what to offer. The Chens were interested but cautious. They'd immigrated from California 3 years ago and still faced prejudice from some of the older families. The idea of formally partnering with others made them nervous about being cheated. Widow Morrison, Ruth, her name was enthusiastic but broke. She offered land instead of capital, a small parcel that could be used as collateral if needed. Lucy Harper's husband Thomas was resistant until Lucy pointed out that if Eleanor controlled the water, their bakery would suffer too. No ranchers meant no customers. He agreed to contribute $200. The harder sell was Daniel Chen. He listened to Clara's pitch, asked sharp questions about the legal structure, and finally shook his head. I understand what you're trying to do, Miss Whitmore, but you're asking me to trust people who still won't buy from Chinese merchants if they can avoid it. People who treat my family like permanent outsiders, no matter how long we've been here. You're right, Clara said simply. They do treat you that way. And it's wrong. But Daniel, if Eleanor Graves gets control of that water, she won't discriminate in her cruelty. She'll hurt everyone equally, your family included. So I should join with people who already don't respect me in order to fight someone who definitely doesn't respect me? That's not much of a choice. It's the only choice that keeps you independent. Look, I'm not going to pretend this valley is perfect or that people aren't prejudiced. They are. But I can promise you this. Any agreement we make will be in writing, legal, and binding. Your family's rights will be protected the same as everyone else's. And if anyone tries to cheat you, I'll fight them the same way I fought Eleanor Graves last Sunday. Daniel studied her for a long moment. Why do you care so much? You're new here. You could just focus on the Boone Ranch and ignore everyone else's problems. Because I know what it's like to be the outsider everyone has already decided about. I know what it's like when powerful people try to destroy you and nobody stands up to help. And I know that the only way to survive that is to build something stronger than their hate. Clara met his eyes directly. I can't promise this valley will suddenly become fair and welcoming, but I can promise that if we do this, your family will have guaranteed water rights in writing, protected by law. That's more security than you'll have if Hale and Eleanor get their way. 2 days later, Daniel Chen agreed to contribute $600, more than any other family except the Pattersons. By the end of the week, Clara had commitments from 7 families totaling just over $3,000. It wasn't quite enough for Hale's asking price, but it was close enough to be worth trying. The problem was time. Hale's Friday deadline had passed, and rumors were already spreading that he'd found another buyer. We're too late, Elias said when Clara returned from her final organizing trip. Hale sold to someone yesterday. Tom heard it at the general store. Who bought it? He doesn't know. The transaction was handled quietly through the bank. Clara felt frustration surge through her. They'd been so close. It was Eleanor. Has to be. Probably through a proxy so her name doesn't appear on the deed. Hale's done that before. Sold to shell companies that turn out to be controlled by wealthy investors who want to hide their involvement. So what now? We just accept that she won? Elias hesitated. There might be another option. It's risky, but... He was interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats. They looked out to see June Whitaker riding toward the ranch, her face flushed with urgency. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Boone, she called as she dismounted. I have information about the Morrison property sale. Edward sent me to tell you immediately. They brought her inside. June was breathing hard, clearly having ridden fast. The buyer wasn't Eleanor Graves, she said. It was Victor Hale himself. He bought it from himself, essentially. He'd been pretending to have another buyer to create urgency, but when no one took his offer, he had to purchase it outright or risk losing the opportunity entirely. Clara and Elias exchanged glances. Why would he do that? Clara asked. If he already controlled the debt, why go through the charade? Because he's over-leveraged. Edward saw the paperwork. Hale borrowed heavily to purchase the Morrison debt in the first place. He was counting on a quick sale to recover his costs and make a profit. When that didn't happen, he had to buy the property himself to prevent the bank from seizing it for non-payment on his loans. So Hale's in financial trouble, Elias said slowly. Serious trouble. And Eleanor Graves knows it. Edward overheard her talking to the bank manager yesterday. She's planning to let Hale drown in debt for a few more weeks, then offer to buy the property from him at a fraction of what he paid. He'll have no choice but to accept or face complete bankruptcy. Clara started to smile. How much debt is Hale carrying on the Morrison property? Edward said the total exposure is around $4,000 between the original debt purchase and the property acquisition. And we have $3,000 committed from the ranchers. If we could find another $1,000, we could buy Hale out before Eleanor gets the chance, Elias finished. Cut her off completely and put the property in the hands of people who'll actually use it fairly. But where do we get another $1,000 in the next few weeks? June asked. Clara thought hard. The harvest supper is in 2 weeks. That's the biggest social event of the year, right? Half the county attends? More than half. Why? Because that's where we make our move. Public setting, lots of witnesses, social pressure to behave fairly. Clara's mind was racing now. If we can get Hale there, present our offer publicly, and make it clear that the whole county is watching to see whether he accepts or plays games. He might take it just to avoid looking like he's in Eleanor's pocket, Elias said. But Clara, we still need that extra $1,000. Then we'll find it. We have 2 weeks. June left shortly after, and Clara immediately started planning. If they were going to pull this off, they'd need more than just money. They'd need to control the narrative, manage the timing, and make sure Eleanor couldn't interfere before the offer was made publicly. The next morning, Clara did something she'd been avoiding since arriving in Red Hollow. She wrote a letter to Kansas. Not to Millbrook, where her past lived like a curse, but to Topeka, where her mother's sister lived. Aunt Catherine had never been wealthy, but she was prudent with money and had always believed in Clara even when the rest of the family had written her off. The letter was short and direct. Clara explained the situation, the amount needed, and what it would mean for her future in Wyoming. She didn't ask for charity, she offered terms. A loan with interest to be repaid over 3 years from ranch profits. She sent the letter knowing the response could take weeks, knowing it might be a refusal, knowing she might be asking too much from someone who had already helped her more than anyone else. But she sent it anyway, because sometimes survival meant being willing to ask for help, even when you'd rather prove you could do everything alone. While waiting for a response, Clara focused on organizing the harvest supper presentation. She met with each of the 7 families who'd committed funds, making sure everyone understood the plan and agreed to the strategy. We present as a united group, she explained at a meeting in the Patterson barn. Not as individual ranchers looking out for ourselves, but as a community pooling resources for collective benefit. That's important. It makes us look cooperative and forward-thinking while Eleanor looks selfish and controlling. What if Hale refuses the offer? Daniel Chen asked. What if he's already committed to selling to Eleanor? Then we make sure everyone at the supper knows he refused a fair offer from local ranchers in favor of an underhanded deal with someone trying to monopolize water rights. We lose the property, but Hale and Eleanor lose credibility. And if Eleanor tries to interfere before the supper, she will. Count on it, which is why we don't tell anyone outside this group about the plan until the day of the event. No leaks, no gossip, no hints. As far as the rest of Red Hollow knows, we're just a group of ranchers attending a social event. The letter from Kansas arrived 12 days later. Clara opened it with shaking hands while Elias watched from across the kitchen. Inside was a bank draft for $1,200 and a short note in her aunt's careful handwriting. Clara, I always knew you were stronger than Kansas gave you credit for. Build something good in Wyoming. Pay me back when you can. Love, Aunt Catherine. Clara's vision blurred. She folded the note carefully and tucked it in her pocket, then looked at Elias. We have the money. Then we have a chance. The harvest supper was held in a massive barn on the Graves estate, which Eleanor made available every year as a demonstration of her generosity and social prominence. The irony of using her own property to undermine her wasn't lost on Clara. The evening began with the usual formalities. Tables laden with food contributed by every family in the county, musicians playing in the corner, children running between adults' legs while their parents socialized. Clara and Elias arrived with the other ranchers in their group, all of them dressed in their best clothes and projecting calm confidence. Eleanor Graves stood near the center of the barn, holding court as always, though Clara noticed the circle around her was smaller than it had been a month ago. The public humiliation from the town meeting still clung to her like a stain, and people were more cautious about openly aligning with her now. Victor Hale was there too, drinking heavily and laughing too loud. He looked like a man pretending everything was fine while his world collapsed around him. Clara waited until the main meal was finished and people were starting to relax into conversation. Then she caught Mayor Walsh's attention and asked if she could make a brief announcement. The mayor looked surprised but agreed. He called for quiet, and the barn gradually settled into attentive silence. "Thank you all for your attention," Clara began. Her voice was steady, projecting confidence she didn't entirely feel. "I know this is a social event, but I have a business matter that affects many families here, and I wanted to address it openly rather than through private negotiations." Eleanor's face tightened. She clearly sensed something coming but didn't know what yet. As most of you know, the Morrison property recently became available for purchase. This property includes vital water access through Harper Creek, access that multiple ranches in this valley depend on for survival, especially during drought years like this one. Heads nodded around the room. Everyone understood the importance of water rights. What you might not know is that the property is currently owned by Mr. Victor Hale, who purchased it with the intention of reselling for profit. Several of us have been watching this situation with concern, knowing that whoever controls that water could effectively control the economic viability of half the ranches in this valley. Hale's face had gone pale. He set down his drink and straightened, clearly realizing where this was going. So we'd like to make an offer, Mr. Hale, right here, right now, in front of everyone. A consortium of 7 local ranching families is prepared to purchase the Morrison property from you for $4,200, which I believe exceeds your total investment in the property by approximately $200. We're offering you a fair profit and a clean exit from what I understand has become a financially complicated situation. The barn erupted in whispers. Hale looked around wildly, clearly trying to figure out how to respond. Eleanor had gone very still, her face a mask of controlled fury. In exchange, Clara continued, the consortium would establish the property as shared water access, legally protected for all current and future ranches that border Harper Creek. No single family would control it. No one could use it as leverage. It would be a community resource managed collectively. This is ridiculous, Eleanor said loudly. Private property transactions shouldn't be conducted in public like some kind of theatrical performance. Why not? Clara turned to face her directly. This transaction affects the entire valley. These people have a right to know what's being decided about resources they depend on. Unless you prefer business to be conducted in private, behind closed doors, where public scrutiny can't interfere with profit-taking. The implicit accusation hung in the air. Eleanor's previous attempts to manipulate Clara had been public. Refusing transparency now would make her look hypocritical. Judge Harrison, who was present as a guest, stood up. Actually, I think Miss Whitmore's approach is admirable. Public transactions reduce the possibility of coercion or fraud. Mr. Hale, you're under no obligation to accept, of course, but you are obligated to give a clear answer. Do you accept this offer or not? Hale looked desperately at Eleanor, clearly hoping for rescue or instruction. But Eleanor remained silent, her expression cold and calculating. She couldn't afford to publicly defend Hale without revealing her own involvement in the scheme. Hale swallowed hard. I need time to consider. We can give you until tomorrow morning, Claire said. But I want to be clear about something, Mr. Hale. This offer expires at noon tomorrow. After that, we'll assume you're committed to a different arrangement and we'll explore other options for securing water access for our ranches. Options that might include legal challenges to water rights claims, appeals to territorial authorities about monopolistic practices, and public campaigns about the importance of fair resource distribution. It wasn't exactly a threat, but it was close enough. And everyone in the room understood the implication. If Hale refused this fair offer to pursue a shady deal with Eleanor, the resulting fight would be messy, public, and potentially expensive. Hale looked around the room at dozens of faces watching him, waiting for his answer, judging his character based on what he chose. I accept, he said finally, his voice barely audible. Then louder. I accept your offer. $4,200 for the Morrison property, sold to your consortium with the water rights protections you described. The barn erupted in applause and shocked conversation. Clara exhaled slowly, feeling tension drain from her shoulders. They'd done it. Against all odds, they'd actually done it. Eleanor Graves stood motionless in the center of the chaos, her face a mask of barely contained rage. She caught Clara's eyes across the room, and the look she gave her was pure venom. This wasn't over. Clara knew that. Eleanor would find new ways to attack, new strategies to pursue. But for tonight, for this moment, Clara had won. And she'd won by doing exactly what she'd done at the town meeting, telling the truth publicly, and trusting that transparency would protect her better than secrecy ever could. After the formal acceptance, the evening dissolved into celebration and shocked discussion. People clustered around Clara and the other consortium members, asking questions about the details, offering congratulations, expressing relief that the water rights would be protected. Lucy Harper hugged Clara tightly. You did it again. You beat her again. We beat her, all of us together. No, this was your plan, your courage. The rest of us just followed your lead. Elias appeared at Clara's elbow, and she felt his hand rest lightly on her back, a gesture of support and partnership that made something warm bloom in her chest. We should probably leave soon, he said quietly, before Eleanor decides to make a scene. But Eleanor didn't make a scene. She simply left, walking out of her own barn with her head high and her spine rigid. Several of her closest supporters followed, but noticeably fewer than would have a month ago. On the ride home, Clara and Elias were quiet, processing what had happened. You know she's going to come after us harder now, Elias said finally. I know. This was a major defeat for her, public, humiliating, and expensive if she'd been planning to profit from Hale's deal. I know that too. So what's the plan for when she retaliates? Clara looked up at the stars scattered across the Wyoming sky, infinite and indifferent. The same plan as always, tell the truth, build alliances, and refuse to be intimidated. It's worked so far. So far isn't forever. No, but it's enough for today. She glanced at him. Are you having second thoughts? About marrying someone who seems to attract this much conflict? I'm marrying someone who stands up for what's right, even when it's hard. That's not the same as attracting conflict. That's just refusing to let bad people win unopposed. That's a generous interpretation. It's an accurate one. He reached over and took her hand. Clara, I've watched you organize 7 independent ranching families into a functional coalition in less than 2 weeks. I've watched you outmaneuver a professional land broker and one of the wealthiest women in the territory. You're not attracting conflict. You're solving problems that everyone else was too scared or too tired to address. Those problems wouldn't exist if I just stayed quiet and accepted my place. Maybe. Or maybe they'd still exist and you just wouldn't be in a position to fix them. He squeezed her hand gently. Either way, I'd rather be married to someone who fights than someone who surrenders. They rode the rest of the way in comfortable silence, and when they reached the ranch, Clara felt something settle in her chest. Not peace. She wasn't naive enough to think the fight was over, but something like certainty. She'd found a place worth defending and a person worth building with. That night, lying in bed, Clara thought about Eleanor Graves's face when Hale accepted the offer. The shock, the fury, the helpless recognition that her careful plan had been dismantled in front of witnesses. It should have felt like victory, and part of it did. But another part of Clara felt something closer to pity, because she understood what it was like to build your entire identity on control, only to have that control stripped away in public. She understood the desperation of someone whose power was the only thing protecting them from insignificance. The difference was that Clara had learned to survive without power, had learned that strength could come from honesty and cooperation instead of domination and fear. Eleanor hadn't learned that yet, and until she did, she'd keep fighting, keep reaching for control through whatever means she could find, which meant Clara would need to keep fighting too. But tomorrow, tonight, she'd allow herself to rest. The weeks following the harvest supper moved with the deceptive calm of a storm gathering strength just beyond the horizon. Victor Hale completed the property transfer without incident, took his modest profit, and left Red Hollow entirely within 10 days. Rumor had it he'd moved to Denver, though nobody cared enough to verify. The Water Rights Consortium became official on a cold morning in late October, with Judge Harrison presiding over the signing of documents that legally protected Harper Creek access for all 7 families. Clara watched each rancher sign their name, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, the solid weight of community built on mutual need rather than mutual fear. Eleanor Graves didn't attend the signing. She didn't send congratulations or acknowledgement. She simply went silent, retreating into her estate like a general regrouping after a devastating loss. That silence worried Clara more than any open attack would have. She's planning something, Clara said to Elias one evening as they worked together mending fence posts. The physical labor had become one of her favorite parts of ranch life, the simple clarity of a problem that could be solved with wood, nails, and effort. Maybe, or maybe she's finally accepted that you're not going anywhere. Eleanor Graves doesn't accept defeat, she reframes it. Clara hammered in a nail with more force than necessary. The question is what she's reframing into. She got her answer 3 days later when Tom Brennan returned from town with news that made Clara's stomach drop. The Territorial Land Office received a formal complaint, Tom said, his face grim. Someone's challenging the legality of the Morrison property transfer, claiming the consortium violated territorial regulations about corporate land ownership. Elias set down the harness he'd been repairing. That's ridiculous. We followed every legal requirement. I know that, boss. You know that. But bureaucrats in Cheyenne don't know that, and they're required to investigate any formal complaint. Judge Harrison's already received notice that all water rights agreements are frozen pending review. Clara felt cold certainty settle over her. Eleanor filed the complaint. Her name's not on it. It came from some territorial official in Cheyenne that nobody's heard of. But yeah, everyone assumes she's behind it somehow. How long does an investigation like that take? Elias asked. Tom shrugged helplessly. Could be weeks, could be months. And in the meantime, nobody knows who actually controls the water rights. Hale sold the property, but the consortium can't legally claim ownership until the review is complete. It's administrative limbo. Clara stood abruptly and began pacing. That's exactly what she wants. Uncertainty. Chaos. Keep everyone unstable and fighting over scraps while she positions herself as the only source of stability. Then when we're all exhausted and desperate, she offers a solution that somehow puts her back in control. What kind of solution? I don't know yet. But Eleanor's smart enough to know she can't win through direct confrontation anymore. So she'll win through patience and bureaucratic manipulation instead. The prediction proved accurate faster than Clara expected. Within a week, families started receiving letters from the Territorial Land Office requesting documentation, fee payments, and responses to technical questions about the consortium structure. Each letter required time, money, and expertise most ranchers didn't have. Daniel Chen was the first to crack. He showed up at the Boone Ranch looking exhausted and frustrated. I can't afford a lawyer to respond to these bureaucratic challenges, he said, and I can't afford to wait months for this to resolve while my cattle go thirsty. I'm sorry, Clara. I need to withdraw from the consortium. Daniel, if you withdraw now, you lose everything you invested. I know, but at least I'll stop hemorrhaging money on legal fees. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Eleanor Graves sent someone to my ranch yesterday, offered to purchase my consortium share for half what I paid, plus guaranteed water access through a private agreement with her estate. Claire's jaw tightened. She's buying out the consortium members individually. It's a good offer, Clara. Better than I'll get if this drags on for 6 months and bankrupts me in the process. It's a trap. Once she controls enough shares, she'll own the consortium entirely and can restructure it however she wants. Everyone who doesn't sell to her will be cut out completely. I know that too, but I have a family to feed and debts to pay. I can't fight Eleanor Graves on principle while my ranch collapses. He stood to leave. I'm sorry, I really am, but I can't be part of this anymore. After he left, Clara sat in silence while Elias made coffee they didn't drink. How many shares does Eleanor need to control the consortium? Elias asked finally. 4 out of 7. If she gets Daniel, she needs 3 more. Claire's mind was racing through possibilities. The Pattersons won't sell. They're too stubborn. Lucy Harper might hold out if her husband doesn't panic, but Ruth Morrison has almost no capital reserves, and the other families are all stretched thin by this drought. So we have maybe a week before Eleanor owns the consortium, and we're right back where we started, except now we're also out $3,000. Clara stood and walked to the window, staring out at the ranch they'd been building together. The garden was flourishing despite the dry weather. The fences were straight and strong. The cattle were healthy. Everything she'd worked for was finally coming together, and Eleanor Graves was about to destroy it through paperwork and patience. No, Clara said quietly, I'm not letting her win this way. Clara, I don't see how we fight a bureaucratic investigation. We don't fight the investigation. We go around it. She turned to face him. Eleanor's strategy only works if the legal uncertainty continues long enough to panic the consortium members into selling, so we eliminate the uncertainty. How? We find out who actually filed that complaint and why. We expose Eleanor's involvement if there is any, and we prove to the Territorial Land Office that our consortium is completely legal, so they close the investigation immediately instead of dragging it out for months. Elias looked skeptical. That would require access to territorial records in Cheyenne, and probably political connections we don't have. Maybe we don't have them, but I bet Judge Harrison does. Judge Harrison listened to Clara's explanation with the careful attention of someone used to evaluating evidence. They were sitting in his red hollow office, a cluttered space filled with law books and case files that smelled like pipe tobacco and old paper. "You're asking me to use my position to investigate a complaint filed against people I know personally," Harrison said when she finished. "That's ethically complicated. I'm asking you to determine whether that complaint was filed in good faith or as part of a harassment campaign designed to manipulate a legitimate business transaction," Clara corrected. "That seems like exactly the kind of thing a territorial judge should investigate." Harrison almost smiled. "You should have been a lawyer, Miss Whitmore. You argue like one." "I argue like someone who's had to defend herself without lawyers too many times. Your Honor, you were at the Harvest Supper. You saw that transaction happen publicly and fairly. You witnessed the consortium formation and signed off on the legal documents yourself. If there's a legitimate legal issue, then we should address it. But if this is Eleanor Graves using bureaucratic channels to circumvent the will of 7 independent families, then someone needs to push back." Harrison was quiet for a long moment, fingers steepled under his chin. "I'll make some inquiries in Cheyenne. No promises, but I'll see what I can find out about who filed that complaint and whether there's any merit to it." "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. Even if I find irregularities, unwinding bureaucratic entanglements takes time. Time Eleanor can use to buy out your partners. Then I'll have to convince them to hold out a little longer." Over the next week, Clara visited each consortium family personally. She brought documentation showing exactly how much they stood to lose if Eleanor took control. She brought Judge Harrison's assurance that he was investigating the complaint's legitimacy. She brought her own stubborn conviction that giving up now meant letting Eleanor win through tactics that should be illegal. Most of them listened. Some of them believed her. But she could see the fear in their eyes, the fear of people who'd gambled their limited resources on a collective venture that was suddenly looking much riskier than promised. Lucy Harper was the most direct about it. "Clara, I believe you, I do. But my husband is terrified we're going to lose everything. He's already talking about taking Eleanor's offer before it disappears entirely. If Thomas sells, you lose any say in how the water rights are managed. Eleanor could cut off the bakery's supply out of spite." "I know, but Thomas sees guaranteed water access in Eleanor's offer versus uncertain water access if the consortium collapses. From his perspective, a guarantee from Eleanor is better than a promise from a consortium that might not survive the legal challenge. Eleanor's guarantees are worthless. She'll honor them exactly as long as it serves her interests and not a second longer. You know that. I know that. But Thomas hasn't seen what Eleanor's capable of the way we have. To him, she's just a wealthy woman making a reasonable business offer." Clara left the Harper home feeling the situation slipping through her fingers. She'd built this coalition through trust and transparency, but trust evaporated fast when money and survival were on the line. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. June Whitaker showed up at the ranch on a Wednesday afternoon, her face flushed with excitement and nervousness. "I have information," she said without preamble, "about the territorial complaint. Edward found out who filed it." Clara's pulse quickened. "Who?" "A man named Richard Pemberton. He works in the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne. Edward did some digging and found out that Pemberton has a brother, Marcus Pemberton, who happens to be married to Eleanor Graves' cousin. The family connection isn't obvious unless you know to look for it, but it's there. So Eleanor used a family connection to file a false complaint through official channels. It gets better. Edward found correspondence between Eleanor and Richard Pemberton discussing the complaint before it was officially filed. She basically told him exactly what to write and when to file it. It's all documented in letters she was careless enough to send through regular mail." Clara stared at June. "You have copies of those letters?" "Edward does. He acquired them from Eleanor's personal correspondence when he was doing work at the Graves estate last week." June looked uncomfortable. "I know it's not exactly legal, but Edward felt the information was important enough to justify bending some rules." "June, this is exactly what we need. If we can prove Eleanor orchestrated a fraudulent government complaint to manipulate a private business transaction, she'd face serious consequences, possibly criminal charges for abusing government processes." June handed over a folder. "These are copies. Edward kept the originals in a safe place in case they're needed as evidence." Clara opened the folder and read through the letters with growing amazement. Eleanor had been breathtakingly brazen, outlining exactly how Richard should frame the complaint to cause maximum delay and uncertainty. She'd even discussed specific families to target with buyout offers once the investigation created panic. This is incredible, June, thank you. And thank Edward. This could save the entire consortium. Just promise me you'll be careful with how you use it. Eleanor has powerful friends. If she figures out where you got this information, I'll protect your sources. I promise. After June left, Clara immediately rode to Judge Harrison's office with the letters. Harrison read them twice, his expression growing grimmer with each sentence. This is clear evidence of corruption and fraud, he said finally. Miss Whitmore, with your permission, I'd like to send these to the Territorial Attorney General in Cheyenne. Richard Pemberton needs to be investigated, and Eleanor Graves needs to answer for attempting to manipulate government processes for personal gain. Will that stop the investigation into the consortium? It should. Once the Attorney General sees that the original complaint was filed fraudulently, they'll dismiss it immediately. The consortium's legal status should be confirmed within a week or two. And Eleanor? That depends on how aggressively the Attorney General wants to pursue charges, but at minimum, her reputation will be destroyed. Using family connections to file false government complaints is exactly the kind of corruption that ends political careers and social standing. Clara thought about Eleanor's face at the town meeting, at the harvest supper, in every confrontation they'd had, the fury and desperation of someone watching their carefully constructed power crumble. Do it, Clara said. Send the letters to Cheyenne. Eleanor made this personal when she tried to destroy me for existing. Now she gets to face the consequences of fighting dirty. The response from Cheyenne came faster than anyone expected. Within 5 days, Richard Pemberton was suspended from his position pending investigation. Within 7 days, the Territorial Land Office issued a formal letter confirming the consortium's complete legal compliance and dismissing all challenges to the property transfer. Within 10 days, Eleanor Graves received a summons to appear before a Territorial Investigation Committee regarding allegations of corruption and abuse of government processes. The news spread through Red Hollow like wildfire. People who'd been cautiously hedging their bets suddenly had opinions about Eleanor they'd been too afraid to voice before. Families who'd considered selling their consortium shares decided to hold on after all. The general store buzzed with speculation about what would happen to Eleanor, whether she'd face criminal charges, whether the Graves family would survive the scandal. Clara watched it all with mixed feelings. She'd wanted to stop Eleanor, wanted to protect the consortium and prove that honesty could triumph over manipulation. But watching someone's entire life collapse, even someone who'd tried to destroy her, felt less like victory and more like witnessing a slow-motion catastrophe. Elias found her sitting on the porch one evening, staring out at the sunset with an expression he couldn't quite read. You're not celebrating, he observed. Should I be? You just took down one of the most powerful women in the territory. You proved she was corrupt, saved the water consortium, and probably prevented her from destroying half a dozen ranching families. That seems worth celebrating. I keep thinking about something my mother said before she died. Clara's voice was quiet. She told me that winning by becoming what you hate isn't really winning at all. That if you fight monsters with monstrous tactics, you just create more monsters. You didn't use monstrous tactics, you used the truth. I used stolen letters and family connections and political pressure. I played the same game Eleanor played, just better. Elias sat down beside her. No, Eleanor tried to destroy you for being different, for not fitting into her narrow idea of what a woman should be. You stopped her from using corrupt processes to cheat people out of resources they needed to survive. Those aren't the same thing, aren't they? Both of us used whatever weapons we had available. Both of us justified our actions by claiming the other person deserved it. Clara, you're being too hard on yourself. Eleanor chose to file fraudulent government complaints. She chose to try manipulating bureaucratic systems to steal water rights. You didn't force her to do any of that. You just exposed what she was already doing. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Do you think she'll ever stop? Even after this, even after everything, will she accept that she lost and move on? I don't know. Some people can't let go of power once they've tasted it. They'd rather burn everything down than admit defeat. That's what I'm afraid of. The answer came 2 weeks later in the form of an unexpected visitor. Marcus Graves showed up at the Boone Ranch on a Saturday morning, alone and looking older than Clara remembered. He dismounted slowly, as if the weight of what he was carrying had aged him years in a matter of weeks. Miss Whitmore, Mr. Boone, could I speak with you both for a moment? They invited him inside. Marcus accepted coffee but didn't drink it, just wrapped his hands around the cup like he needed something to hold on to. I came to apologize, he said finally, for my wife's behavior, for the damage she's caused, for not stopping her sooner when I saw what she was becoming. Mr. Graves, you're not responsible for Eleanor's choices, Clara began. No, but I'm responsible for enabling them, for looking the other way when she destroyed people's reputations, for funding her schemes when I knew they were wrong, for choosing my own comfort over doing what was right. He finally met Clara's eyes. I knew about the letters to Reverend Shaw. I knew about the arrangement with Richard Pemberton. I knew all of it, and I said nothing because saying something would have meant standing up to Eleanor, and I was too much of a coward to do that. Elias and Clara exchanged glances. Neither of them had expected this. Why are you telling us this now? Clara asked gently. Because the territorial investigation is going forward. Eleanor will likely face charges. And because before that happens, I wanted you to know that she's leaving Red Hollow. For good. She's leaving? She can't stay. Not after this. The social humiliation alone would destroy her, and the legal consequences could be worse. So she's moving to San Francisco to live with her sister. I'm staying here to handle the estate and try to make amends for the damage we've caused. Marcus reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. This is a letter Eleanor wrote. She asked me to deliver it to you personally. I haven't read it, so I can't tell you what it says. But she insisted you should have it. After Marcus left, Clara and Elias stared at the envelope for several minutes before Clara finally opened it. The letter inside was written in Eleanor's elegant handwriting, though the words were less polished than Clara expected. Miss Whitmore, I am writing to you from a place I never imagined I would occupy, complete defeat. You have won every battle we fought. You exposed my lies, destroyed my reputation, and proved yourself stronger than I ever gave you credit for. I could make excuses. I could blame you for coming to Red Hollow and disrupting the order I had spent decades building. I could claim that everything I did was justified by my desire to protect the community. But the truth is simpler and uglier than that. I tried to destroy you because you represented everything I could never be. You were strong without needing to control others. You were respected without demanding fear. You built alliances through honesty while I maintained power through manipulation. Watching you succeed despite breaking every rule I thought women had to follow made me realize how much of my own life had been a performance designed to earn approval from people whose opinions didn't actually matter. I hated you for that revelation. Hated you for being free in ways I had never allowed myself to be. So I tried to destroy you the way I had destroyed others who threatened my carefully constructed authority. And you survived it the same way you survived everything else, by refusing to apologize for existing. I won't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that you were right and I was wrong. About power, about strength, about what it means to build something worth having. I hope Red Hollow appreciates what you've given them. I suspect they will eventually, though it may take time for them to fully understand what they almost lost. Eleanor Graves. Clara read the letter 3 times, then handed it to Elias without comment. Well, he said after finishing it, that's not what I expected. Me neither. Do you believe her? That she's actually learned something from all this? Clara thought about it carefully. I think she's learned that her old tactics don't work anymore. Whether that translates into actual growth or just better manipulation remains to be seen, but I don't think I'll ever know for sure, and I'm okay with that. You're not going to respond? What would I say? That I accept her apology? I'm not sure I do. That I forgive her? That feels premature. Clara folded the letter and tucked it away. Eleanor made her choices, and now she's living with the consequences. That's not my responsibility to manage. The wedding happened on a clear November morning with Judge Harrison officiating and half the valley in attendance. Clara wore a simple dress that Lucy Harper had helped her make, practical enough for ranch work, but nice enough for the occasion. Elias wore his best suit and looked uncomfortable but happy. They exchanged vows in front of the newly repaired barn, with Tom and Danny and the consortium families standing as witnesses. The ceremony was brief and unsentimental, focused on the practical commitments of partnership rather than romantic declarations. Do you, Clara Whitmore, take Elias Boone as your husband, to work beside him, stand with him, and build a life with him for as long as you both shall choose? I do. And do you, Elias Boone, take Clara Whitmore as your wife, to work beside her, stand with her, and build a life with her for as long as you both shall choose? I do. Then by the authority vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I pronounce you married. You may kiss if you're so inclined. They kissed briefly, more like partners sealing an agreement than lovers in a romantic story. But there was warmth in it, and trust, and the beginning of something that might eventually become love if they were patient enough to let it grow. The celebration afterward was simple. Food contributed by every family in the consortium, music from a fiddle player who'd traveled from 3 counties away, and dancing in the yard while the autumn sun warmed the cold air. Daniel Chen approached Clara during the festivities, looking sheepish. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for almost selling out when things got difficult, for not trusting that you knew what you were doing. You were protecting your family, Daniel. I understand that. Still, you held the line when I was ready to fold. That takes courage. I'm not sure I have."
Courage isn't not being scared. It's being terrified and doing what needs doing anyway. You've shown that plenty of times. You just forgot for a minute.
As the sun began setting, Clara found herself standing apart from the celebration, watching her new community gather on the land she'd helped protect. The ranch hands were teaching children how to rope fence posts. Lucy Harper was distributing cake with the efficiency of someone used to feeding crowds. The Pattersons were dancing with each other, still graceful after 43 years of marriage. Elias appeared beside her with 2 cups of cider. "Hiding from your own wedding?" he asked.
Observing. There's a difference. She accepted the cider. I keep thinking about how different this is from Kansas, how different I am.
How so? In Kansas, I spent 7 years fighting just to survive. Every day was about making it to the next day without losing more than I'd already lost. There was no community, no partnership, no sense that tomorrow might actually be better than today. And here? Here I've spent 3 months building instead of just surviving. We protected water rights, created a legal consortium, stood up to corruption, and somehow ended up with something that looks almost like a future. She turned to look at him. I'm not used to that. To things actually working out. They didn't work out on their own. You made them work out. There's a difference. We made them work out. I couldn't have done any of this alone. Elias put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture that was becoming more natural with practice. So what happens now? Now that Eleanor's gone and the consortium is stable and we're officially married? Clara thought about it. Now we run the ranch. We honor our agreements with the consortium families. We keep building something worth defending. And when the next crisis comes, because there's always a next crisis, we handle it the same way we handled this one. With honesty and stubbornness? With honesty and stubbornness. She smiled. It's worked pretty well so far. They stood together watching the celebration wind down as evening approached. People began gathering their children, hitching wagons, saying their goodbyes with promises to help with the spring planting. Lucy Harper hugged Clara tightly before leaving. You saved this valley, you know. Not just the water rights. You saved us from becoming the kind of place where Eleanor Graves decides who matters and who doesn't. I just refused to leave when people wanted me gone. That's not exactly heroic. That's exactly heroic. Most people give up when the fight gets hard. You just kept standing. Lucy pulled back, her eyes wet. Thank you for showing us what that looks like. After everyone left, Clara and Elias stood together in the quiet ranch yard. The stars were emerging overhead, infinite and clear, in the way they only were this far from cities. I have something for you, Elias said. He disappeared into the house and returned with a small wooden box. Inside was a leather-bound journal, empty pages waiting to be filled. For documenting the ranch, he explained. Production records, weather patterns, lessons learned. I know you like keeping detailed records, and I thought maybe this could be the start of something we build together. A record of what we accomplished, what we tried, what worked, and what didn't. Clara ran her fingers over the leather cover, thinking about all the documents she'd kept from Kansas. All those records that had seemed like just sad proof of failure at the time, but had ended up being the weapons that saved her. I'll keep it honest, she said. The failures along with the successes, the hard years along with the good ones. I wouldn't expect anything else from you. That night, Clara made the first entry in the journal by lamplight while Elias slept. November 1883. Today I married Elias Boone and officially became Clara Boone. The name still feels strange, like clothing that doesn't quite fit yet, but might with time. We celebrated with the consortium families and people who've become something like friends. Eleanor Graves left Red Hollow last week, defeated by her own corruption. The water rights are secure. The ranch is stable. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm not fighting for basic survival. Instead, I'm building towards something that might actually last. I don't know if I'm any good at building. I've spent so many years in defensive mode that creation feels foreign and risky. But I'm willing to try. That's what this journal is, I suppose. An attempt, a record of trying to build something good in a place that didn't initially want me. We'll see how it goes. She closed the journal and looked around the small bedroom that was now officially hers. The house still wasn't fancy, probably never would be, but it was clean and solid and filled with the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've earned your place in it. The woman who'd stepped off that train in July with $11 and a reputation in tatters had survived the worst Red Hollow could throw at her. She'd faced down social humiliation, bureaucratic manipulation, and direct attacks on her character. She'd organized strangers into a functioning coalition. She'd exposed corruption and protected resources. She'd married a man who saw her strength as an asset rather than a threat. Not because anyone rescued her, not because powerful people decided to be kind, but because she'd refused to be smaller than she was, quieter than she needed to be, or more apologetic than the situation warranted. That refusal had cost her plenty: comfort, easy acceptance, the social approval that came with performing acceptable femininity. But it had also earned her something worth more than any of those things. It had earned her a life she'd chosen, rather than one that had been chosen for her. Clara blew out the lamp and settled into bed beside her husband. Outside, the Wyoming wind moved through the prairie grass with its endless patience. Tomorrow would bring new work, new challenges, new problems that needed solving. The ranch would need tending, the consortium would need managing, and the valley would continue its hard negotiations with weather and circumstance. But tonight, Clara allowed herself to rest, to simply exist in this moment between surviving the past and building the future. To acknowledge that she'd done something difficult and important, even if the world would never tell her story or remember her name. She'd come to Red Hollow as the woman everyone mocked. Too tall, too strong, too honest for comfort. She was leaving that identity behind not by changing who she was, but by proving that who she was had always been exactly enough. The town would remember this eventually, though probably not the way Clara would have written it. They'd remember the consortium and the water rights protection. They'd remember Eleanor Graves's fall and Victor Hale's departure. They'd remember that something important shifted in Red Hollow during the summer and fall of 1883. But the most important transformation, the one that mattered most, happened inside Clara herself. She'd learned that strength didn't mean never being afraid. It meant being terrified and showing up anyway. She'd learned that power built on honesty lasted longer than power built on control. She'd learned that the people who seemed weakest often carried the kind of strength that mountains would envy. And she'd learned that sometimes the life you build from ruins ends up stronger than anything you could have built from privilege. Those lessons couldn't be taken from her. Not by Eleanor Graves or anyone like her. Not by future hardships or inevitable setbacks. Those lessons were earned in blood and tears and stubborn refusal to surrender, and they belonged to Clara completely. As she drifted toward sleep, Clara thought about all the women back in Kansas who'd faced similar situations. Women who'd been pressured by men like Walter Grayson, judged by communities that valued reputation over truth, forced to choose between survival and dignity. Some of those women had survived. Some hadn't. Clara had been lucky enough to land in a place where survival and dignity could coexist, but she knew that luck was fragile and unevenly distributed. Maybe someday, she thought, the world would change enough that women wouldn't have to be as strong as she'd been forced to become. Maybe someday, telling the truth wouldn't require the kind of courage that left you shaking afterward. Maybe someday, people would judge each other on character rather than conformity. But until that someday arrived, Clara would keep doing what she'd always done. Standing tall, speaking honestly, refusing to apologize for taking up space in a world that preferred her smaller. And teaching anyone who watched that strength came in forms the powerful rarely expected, in the calloused hands of farm women, in the stubborn pride of immigrants, in the quiet dignity of people who survived impossible things. That was the real victory. not defeating Eleanor Graves or securing water rights or saving the valley. The real victory was Clara finally believing she deserved to win in the first place. Everything else was just details.